Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku's hero journey took a dark turn part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. So let's start the video. It was a normal day in a building in the city of Tokyo. It was an 8-story building that housed a series of apartments with all types of tenants. These accommodations were not very large since they had 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a living room, as well as a somewhat small kitchen attached to a dining room, equally small in size. In the basement of the building there was a communal laundry room, where all the tenants used to wash clothes. This room was one of the advantages of renting an apartment or for owners who paid maintenance on the building. Generally, there were 5 to 7 apartments per floor, since some people who had bought 2 apartments on the same floor chose to join them to increase their size, although this was not the case of the young man where this story began. In a room you could see a 15-year-old young man with a white complexion. He had a pair of green eyes and freckles stood out on his cheeks, in addition to having curly and quite tousled green hair. The teenager put on and zipped up a blue jacket with white stripes on the arms, along with sports pants of the same color as the jacket. He was wearing red boot-type sneakers, which were his favorite shoes. The boy was preparing to go to the UA entrance exam, one of the most prestigious hero schools in Japan. The young man just sighed and felt the nerve in the pit of his stomach. It had been quite a different year since he met 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝐔𝐸𝐽, or All Might as he was known worldwide by most people. It all happened the day he tried to save the life of his classmate 𝗵𝘃𝗲, although calling him a classmate was saying a lot. After that, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 offered to train Izuku, as well as inherit his one-for-all quirk. The problem had been the rigorous training the teenager had had to endure for a year. In the words of the hero who trained him, if your body is not ready to withstand the quirk, it could destroy you. In fact, not many days had passed since he ate his mentor's hair. Now that the green-haired man thought about it, didn't he understand why he had to consume the previous user's DNA? But according to the hero who trained him, there was no other way to pass the quirk. The young man was going to continue reflecting, until a voice in the room called him. "Izuku, Mr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 arrived," said an older female voice well known to the young man, which caused him to quickly leave his room, which housed all kinds of mangas, comics, figures, and posters of All Might. In fact, the green-haired young man had never let 𝗧𝗵𝗲 enter his room. He felt a little sorry for him. But because of what the hero had once commented, some fans can be annoying and can become very toxic. The freckled young man didn't want All Might to think that he was leaving the most powerful quirk to some random fanboy, although in reality he was. When the 15-year-old boy left his room, he saw his mother, which was a woman around 40, and she had a light skin tone, along with green hair similar to that of her son, only a little longer and tied with a ponytail. She was wearing a pink sweater with a white t-shirt underneath it, as well as a green skirt that reached her knees. The woman had a somewhat stocky build, as well as a shorter height than Izuku. The young man saw outside the arch of the door that gave entrance to the apartment a rather weak man. He had a very large white t-shirt, along with green pants. A silver buckle of a bull stood out on his belt. He also wore shoes that were a brighter shade of green than his pants. The adult, around 40 years old, also had a somewhat light skin tone, and his hair was blonde, but without the shine that he saw when he transformed. At first, the coexistence between All Might and his mother was strange for Izuku, since he introduced himself as 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝐔𝐸𝐽, which he does to this day. He still remembers how his mentor had insisted on telling his mother part of the truth. It was a story told by the former one-for-all user, where he commented that the green-haired young man, 14 years old at that time, had set out to help a classmate trapped by a person who used his quirk for evil. In addition, he saw a glimpse of a quirk of strength in the young man when doing said act. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 introduced himself as a talent scout and part of All Might's administrative office. It was a social role that said office played, which consisted of channeling and preparing young people with quirks so that they would be of great help in hero operations in the future. Which was true. The office of the so-called #1 hero had a social area, where certain scholarships or incentives were given to young people not to abandon their studies. Although of course for 𝗏𝗏 it was always common to see that type of scenes in some news programs, and even more so in that world. There was never a lack of a profiteer who proposed to the young people with their heads full of dreams and to the unsuspecting parents to return to their children the next great hero or celebrity. In this way, father figures released their children with strangers. Many of those stories ended in many problems, from missing young people to teenagers or children who had been abused or exploited by that type of talent search, which is why Mrs. Midoriya had to thoroughly investigate All Might's agency. and their social work. Curiously, it was one of the few agencies to present sincere work. Several popular heroes such as 𝗵𝗵𝗲 𝗵𝗲 had been supported by one of the agency's programs. Furthermore, they were heroes who testified that it was a true program, as well as other heroes or people who worked in some way related to them. They also testified that the agency of the #1 hero, which had no double intentions. The mother of the aspiring hero went on some occasions to see where her son trained. She was surprised by the fact that he had to clean a beach alone. But as 𝗧𝗵𝗲 explained, she was part of the social service that the agency provided. She helped keep parts of the city clean, and served as training according to the young man with his quirk. In the case of Izuku, having an ability based on strength, he was given tasks according to said ability that would help him develop her quirk. As the months passed, the green-haired boy's mother accepted 𝗧𝗵𝗲 as someone who really did a good job. Furthermore, the woman on the one hand hoped that her son, despite having a quirk now, could give up the idea of being a hero, seeing that it was not as glamorous and special a life as the media was selling. But the boy kept trying despite everything. The green-haired girl understood that being a hero was extremely important for her son. More since he saw him destroyed by the issue when he was a minor. It was that time that a doctor told them that his son was one of the 3 types of quirkless. Although deep down he wanted his son to fail the test, so as not to take that path. However, the woman wanted to support him, despite the mixed feelings. "Izuku, if you see something dangerous," the woman said without knowing what to say now. I never expected that she would have this day in front of her. "Don't worry, Mom, I'm not going to take risks," the green-haired young man said with encouragement and even with a lot of nerve. "Don't worry, Mrs. Midoriya, I will be letting you know about everything that happens. At UA they are very strict about letting the parents, family members or friends of the applicants pass. It is truly a very private event. Not even the media can show this day," he said calmly but trying to comfort the boy's mother. For 𝗧𝗵𝗲 it was normal to see how the woman cared about her son. He understood it. She was a single mother and Izuku was her only child. More because the boy's entire life was without a quirk, and that marks people in this society. "Thank you, Mr. Yagi, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Thank you very much that Izuku was part of the admission preparation program," the woman, looking at the blonde, said in a sincere tone. "I don't have much contact with him, but I'll send him the message, with someone from the agency." The weak man responded a little nervously. "Still, thank you," he concluded by looking at the man who works with All Might. He never expected that someone who worked with the current #1 hero would be a fairly humble person. "It's my job," he concluded again nervously, the self-proclaimed talent seeker. "Izuku," the boy's mother said again, looking at her young son. For a moment she was silent while her son looked back at her. "You will do very well," she spoke, changing the phrase in her head when she saw her son excited about her. The young man only hugged her mother, to which she responded by hugging him back. It lasted a few moments, but both had nothing more to say to each other, or that's how the young man felt. +Ultra, the mother said while for a moment she broke the hug with a somewhat clipped and nervous tone. +Ultra, the green-haired young man said very animatedly. The mother of the young former quirkless only smiled slightly as she saw her son near the door next to 𝗧𝗵𝗲. "Don't worry, you'll know anything first," the blonde-haired man said, trying to calm the mother. "Yes, Mom, we'll see you in the afternoon when you get back from work," the freckled young man concluded. "Well, we have to move, young Midoriya, or it will be late," the blonde man concluded with the phrase that had become common in recent months. He used it to refer to the 15-year-old young man. The adult began to walk down the hallway of the building, followed by the green-haired boy, while the youngest turned around and raised his hand to say goodbye to his mother again. Since they both had a certain distance in the hallway, and they were far from the apartment where the young man in the blue jacket lived, the two figures ran into the stairs of the building, thus beginning their descent down these. "I'm a little nervous," the younger of the two men commented without thinking. "It's normal, it's the day of the admission exam," the one with the bull buckle said in a calm tone, as they continued down the stairs of the building. "It's just that I haven't tried the quirk yet. How do I activate the powers?" the young man in the blue jacket asked quite nervously. I thought you had used it already." "I don't know, in some simple test. How to carry something heavy by yourself. Maybe a refrigerator. Or take a strong jump." The professional hero was now commenting somewhat anxiously. "It's just that I don't feel any different." "What was it like when they gave you the quirk?" the freckled young man concluded, making sure that they were really alone when he said that question. "My teacher only gave me a hair of hers, and almost immediately I had the powers," the weak-looking man commented, remembering that event. "Was she the one who instituted the hair thing?" the youngest of the group asked, somewhat confused. "According to what they told me, his teacher gave him a nail," the blonde responded thoughtfully, while they were still going down the stairs. "Now I think that the hair thing doesn't sound so bad," the young aspiring hero was speaking, in addition to thinking about how annoying it must have been for the woman All Might trained to bite a nail. It seems to me that they gave the nail as a tradition because there was a bald user. The adult in the group said again in a thoughtful tone. Okay. All Might, how many one for all users have there been? The young man in the group asked, confused once again, although the questions were an attempt to get rid of the nerves of the test. With you we would be 9. But don't worry about that now, young Midoriya, you must have a calm mind to prepare for the test. You had a light breakfast, right? The former bearer of the one for all asked at the end, somewhat worried. Yes, the young man responded, confused. That's good. I vomited after my entrance test. The man around 40 commented with some annoyance, remembering his entrance exam. The young aspiring hero mentioned very nervously due to his mentor's response. About 25 years ago, the tests were climbing buildings or tall structures. It was a mixture of many things. A few days before the test, my teacher had given me her quirk. I used it in the admission exam without problems. Your body is ready and so are you. It will be something similar, she said, confiding the hero who held the title of the #1 hero. From what I read, last year only 0.2% of the candidates passed the exam. There are more than 4,000 students. The freckled young man was still talking nervously. I told you not to look for that data. The new bearer's guide commented somewhat awkwardly. I couldn't sleep. There are many who try to enter every year. But he was interrupted by his mentor. The young man, without realizing how quickly they had gone down, realized that they were both at the bottom of the building. Now they were walking down the street to a somewhat old car, compared to the current model of the vehicle. It was not a luxurious model in itself, but rather a practical one, but the vehicle was well cared for. The car was blue. Young Midoriya, don't worry, you'll do fine. We have trained for a year. You are ready, the professional hero concluded confidently, while he took out the keys to the vehicle and opened the door for the youngest. That's what you think. I mean, I feel under a lot of pressure. With all this, the 15-year-old boy said nervously, while he got into the car and the older man closed the door. The adult walked around the car, while he turned to the street and quickly got into the vehicle. Sure, you're ready. You should start doing things with more confidence. Put your belt on, the hero concluded while he adjusted his belt. The teenager only put on his belt almost as soon as his mentor mentioned it, which began to start the car and move. Any advice? The boy still asked a little nervously. Stay away from troublemakers. Unless it's a tournament-type exam or pitched battle. There you must face them, the experienced hero said without giving it much importance, without realizing that he made the young man even more nervous. Are you telling me that sometimes the entrance tests are battle royal tournaments? The young man in the group asked again, even more nervous. For a moment the blonde-haired man sighed internally. He had spent a year with the boy, but he still had that latent insecurity. That's why he wanted Torino to meet him. It would be a way to help him build character. But the pro hero only remembered the short words his former mentor said to him. You deemed him worthy. It's enough for me. It's your responsibility. That's not including the rude things he used to say because of his age. He thought, the 8th bearer of the quirk, that sometimes he didn't know how to encourage the young pupil to be braver or with self-confidence. He knew that he had the feelings of a true hero. But another thing was different was how the boy behaved on a daily basis. Young Midoriya. In UA they tend every year to change the tests. Sometimes they do an anniversary of these, with some updates or improvements. They are to check the applicants and see that they really have the makings of heroes. That's why I said, don't look for evidence from years past. Just do what you always do. Let the desire to help guide you. I know you're a hero, the man behind the wheel concluded quite animatedly, while he saw the green-haired young man, who was thoughtful about what he said. Thank you, All Might, the young man with freckles concluded, somewhat nervous. For him it had been a year full of emotions. He didn't know how to react to everything he had experienced. On the one hand, the hero he most admired had taken him on as a kind of apprentice. On the other hand, there was the issue that he did not want to disappoint him. The teenager did not accept it, but he had many questions in his head. Like, what would happen if he failed today? But before he could continue thinking about it, the mentor pulled him out of himself. We have to play some music. What do you want to hear, young Midoriya? The professional hero asked to change the subject and help his protege relax before the test. How about the covers album you recorded? The 15-year-old young man responded animatedly. I'm not crazy about that. He said something annoying about himself for having participated in that album a few years ago. It was a charity work. He did it with the intention of raising money for charity. But not even he thought that an album with bad music and singing out of tune would sell so much. He himself asked himself, how the hell did it end up in the top 10 bestsellers? That day he understood that people can buy anything, just because someone is popular or because people don't use his judgment. Torino's complaints about society did have a basis in that sense. Because, if you ended up among the bestsellers, many liked it. I remember that in primary school many listened to it. The aspiring hero said animatedly. You need to change your musical tastes. And I did that to help a charity. but it's not a good album. I don't sing. Plus they brought in people who edit and play very badly. Not even he himself understood who the hell thought of nominating him for an award. I don't know much about music, the green-haired young man concluded, a little discouraged for not knowing what to respond to the hero. You don't have to know. Just listen to something that you like and you identify with. In reality, music is very subjective. For example, I really like to listen to this song before a mission. The driver of the vehicle concluded while pressing several fingers with his finger times the screen on the cell phone, which was connected to the car's sound system. A saxophone sound and soft drum beats began to come out of the vehicle's horn. For a few moments no one said anything and they just listened to the music, which began to change in slow rhythms. Doesn't sound bad, the green-haired young man said, impressed. In reality, he was not very fond of listening to music, except for a hero game that he had played or a series that he liked. Yes, that's why I have it on my cell phone, the professional hero said quite calmly. The atmosphere relaxed quite a bit after that. During the trip they both talked about anything. They had started to have that dynamic a few months ago. Without them realizing it, the trust between them had grown, although Toshinori was still a little awkward that Izuku called him All Might. The boy was one of the few people he preferred to call him by his real name when they were together, although that still happens to several of his friends. 𝗵𝗲 was the perfect example. Without realizing it, the two occupants of the vehicle had just arrived a few blocks from a large building shaped like a giant H. We arrived, the professional hero said, smiling, looking at the institution through the windshield. I didn't know that UA was so big, the teenager commented, surprised by the size of the school. That's just the front facade. The campus is bigger at the back and in the surrounding areas, the blonde-haired man said without giving it much importance. Is it even bigger? The freckled man asked, surprised. Don't worry, young Midoriya. I must go ahead because I must speak with the director of the academy, he said, still confident in looking at the building. The hero himself remembered several things from when he was at school. Thank you for everything, All Might. The ninth heir of the One for All said nervously. Don't even mention it, kid. Don't feel intimidated by anyone. The professional hero said, quite happy to see that his pupil was finally ready to take his exam. Midoriya just smiled for his mentor and opened the car door. He planned to say something like, look at me. She just had to get out of the vehicle until the would-be hero tried to get out of the car without success. A few seconds passed without the young man being able to move from his seat. Young Midoriya, you haven't unbuckled your belt yet, the professional hero said a little with his eyes closed and in a nervous tone. Yes, sorry, the aspiring hero said, quite embarrassed and blushing, while he nervously tried to take off his belt and get out of the vehicle. Try to calm down, remember, just do what you know, he said once again in a friendly tone to encourage his young pupil. Midoriya for her part just nodded his head as she looked at the hero and closed the door. I'll see you on the other side, boy, the hero said quite happily, while slowly starting the vehicle. The 15-year-old young man watched the hero walk away, until he spoke to himself. Yes, the other side, he said while looking at the floor for a moment, to return his gaze to the large H-shaped building. The young man only began to walk, while he saw how that building only grew the closer he got. The young aspiring hero only walked slowly the closer he got to the building. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, since everything seemed so unreal. A year ago he was just quirkless, and now he was going to participate in the UA entrance exam. The teenager could only feel in his stomach that he was more nervous than before. In himself he understood why All Might told him to eat little breakfast. For a moment he turned to see several young people of various ages approaching the building. Most were also wearing sports clothing, but many looked very confident. For a moment he thought about the situation. A part of him wanted to run away, but another part of him reproached himself, saying that he spent a whole year training for this. The young man just sighed as he looked up at the building again, and he understood. He had to go to the front to take the exam. The young man began to walk determinedly, just looking at the building, until he felt how he tripped and crashed to the floor. However, the blow never came. Wait, since when can I levitate? The green-haired man asked, surprised when he saw himself suspended and not touching the floor. Actually it was my quirk, a female voice responded behind the young man. Midoriya only felt how he was put back on the floor, which caused him with a very nervous face to turn to see a young woman his age. But she had brown hair, just as she was a little shorter than hers. The young woman was only wearing a green sports suit with a closed jacket, wearing shoes in a lighter green tone. The teenager was light-skinned with small patches on her cheeks. When she saw the young man, she just smiled back at him, leaving the green-haired man even more nervous. Don't worry, I'm nervous too. Just be careful where you step, she said calmly and quite happily, while she looked at her fellow aspiring hero. Izuku was quite nervous. He actually barely talked to the girls at his high school. This was due to his quirkless condition, except when he was asked to do a job or some team task. But even so, many people treated him like a weirdo. He actually had almost no friends from his high school. 𝐵𝑃𝑃𝐺. Thank you, the young teenager responded quite nervously and blushing. No need. You have to enter. If we are late for the written exam, you will lose points. Good luck. The young woman spoke as she began to walk carefully, following her own advice. The young man only saw the girl walk away and get lost as he entered the doors of the building, which caused the freckled man to begin to murmur strangely to himself, while he walked again without paying attention to where he was going, which caused several aspiring heroes to see him strange and avoid him. I just talked to a girl. But what kind of quirk was that? Could he have telekinetic powers or super strength? The young aspiring hero kept muttering to himself, which caused him not to pay much attention to his surroundings. Continuing his way along a large hallway without him realizing it, there was an electronic clock on a wall that read 8:55 a.m., which was worrying because the written exam started at 9 a.m. But before the young man could get lost across the large campus, a hand touching him on the shoulder causing him to snap out of his thoughts. "Child, what's wrong with you?" commented a fairly tall man, with glasses and a mustache, added to a beard. The man was wearing some kind of large black turtleneck sweater. The outfit looked like something out of a modern RPG. "That?" the young man asked, confused. "Child, he's 4 minutes of arriving late. If you arrive late, you will lose many points on your exam," the man with glasses said in a very high tone. "Wait, where is the written exam room?" Izuku asked nervously when he saw that he was in a large hallway, and he had not followed the directions of the arrows at the entrance. These children of today want to save the world, and they are not able to arrive early. "Wow, fast." The man of around 30 years old spoke very enthusiastically, while pointing to a hallway in the back. The young man only began to accelerate his pace, but he heard the adult's voice again. "Do not run." "I'm not running." The green-haired boy responded, confused, turning to see the adult behind. "No, you accelerate your step without running. I tell the other girl." The adult responded enthusiastically again, while he only pointed ahead. Izuku looked ahead, but he only noticed a kind of white jacket with his back passing quickly at the end of the hallway. Without understanding anything, the young man began to speed up his pace as well. But upon entering the hallway, he quickly ran into several applicants who, like him, everyone walked quickly or ran so as not to be late and have points taken away from them. The freckled young man was just walking down the hallway, while all kinds of young people ran, leaving him aside or even pushing him. The young man in the blue jacket was surprised by the large number of mutant quirks he saw, as well as some young people who seemed normal. But if there was one thing he had learned, it was that those normal young people were usually the ones with the most dangerous quirks, at least in his experience remembering his personal bully, which led him to think if he would run into Bakugo. The blonde didn't know anything that he was training to enter the entrance exam. But with thousands of students taking the entrance exam, it was almost impossible to come across him. The young man looked ahead to notice how large crowds of teenagers were galloping around trying to enter through a large door. Outside of it was an adult. The freckled man thought that he would be a teacher, although he looked like a giant gray tofu. He was wearing tight red clothing with long limbs protruding from it. He also wore black boots with yellow soles. The young man was not disrespectful in that sense. He knew that there are all kinds of people, no matter how strange and unlikely they seemed physically. As he approached the door, he saw a digital clock above it, which read 8:57 a.m. The young man with green hair got as close as he could until the man guarding the door spoke. "You have 3 minutes to enter and find a seat," the adult said in a serious attitude. Many young people looked quite intimidated, something that the 15-year-old did not understand. But someone was saying something to the young man from the Midoriya family. "𝗵𝗵𝗲, he is one of the UA professors. Before you arrived, he said something that intimidated the others, so you better stand in line when he says it," a slightly thick voice said, but in a very respectful way. Midoriya turned for a moment to the origin of the voice and saw a figure several heads taller than him. The green-haired young man was very impressed. He was a person covered with light brown hair on his face and darker on the part of his head, arms, and legs. A pair of fangs protruded from his lower jaws. The figure was wearing a brown sports jacket and shorts in the same tone with red stripes. He was also wearing quite large white tennis shoes, as well as a pair of glasses. The figure had her hair somewhat long to her shoulders. "Hey, thanks. Do you also work here at UA?" The freckled man responded, quite impressed and embarrassed. "I'm also going to take the exam," the 15-year-old hairy young man said, a little annoyed, even though his appearance made him look older. "Hey, sorry, I thought. I'm sorry," the young man in the blue jacket commented, quite embarrassed and blushing, not knowing how to apologize to his fellow aspiring hero. The wild-looking young man only sighed. It was common for people to treat him that way the first time they saw him. They always confused him with someone adult, or his classmates gave him derogatory nicknames. "Calm down," he said without downplaying much importance. For his part, the green-haired man didn't know how to fix the situation, so he tried to start from scratch. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," the young man said a little embarrassed, introducing himself. 𝗔𝗫𝗄 𝗔𝗂𝗫, a pleasure, sir. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏, the young man said in a respectful tone, although his voice made it sound intimidating. Hey, you can call me 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏, 𝗲𝗵's pupil said even more embarrassedly. Now she felt worse, because despite his comment, the young man in front of him spoke with great respect. Sure, you can call me 𝗧𝗫𝗍, he said once again in a respectful tone. Before any of them could continue with the casual chat, the gray-skinned professor spoke. Very well, line up starting with this young man, the first one you see making a fuss. He will have a delay in his final grade, the professional hero said in a firm voice. Almost instantly everyone obeyed and formed up behind a young man that it was impossible for 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 to identify, due to the large number of teenagers in front, plus several of them taller than him. This made it more difficult for him to perceive who was in front of him. However, when he saw 𝗧𝗫𝗍 forming in front of him, Izuku only imitated him as some aspirants formed behind the ninth wielder. Go forward and take your place in the auditorium. Start in the lowest part you find free. If someone discovers you copying, you are disqualified, the hero said while looking at the clock above his head, which marked 1 minute to 9. The morning. In less than a few seconds, several young people had already entered the auditorium. For a moment, several, including the green-haired young man, were stunned, since the auditorium was at least 20 times larger than any IMAX screen room that the freckled young man had attended. However, he was brought out of his thoughts by the voice of his companion. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏, I wish you the best for qualifying, the hairy young man said in front of the green-haired young man. Wait, why do you say that? Aren't they going to sit us together? The aspiring hero commented confused. Most likely not, the young man with the mutant quirk said quite confidently, knowing that they usually sat him in the front. It was common for this to happen to him because of his height, and it was also a measure that his teachers implemented so that he would not cheat on exams when he was in secondary and primary school. I also want you to come in, the green-haired young man said sincerely. Perhaps at first he had been very surprised by his fellow aspiring hero, but from the few words they exchanged he had taken a liking to the tall young man. Plus Izuku wondered what abilities 𝗧𝗫𝗍𝗏 would have with his quirk. I say the same, the young man with glasses commented. It was fast, but several teachers and assistants from the Hero Academy were beginning to move the young people in different directions. It was perhaps the most complicated day for the school staff, as they had to supervise the students taking the tests, putting those who had a quirk that gave them an unfair advantage in front of the audience, as well as identifying applicants who knew each other or had gotten along well to separate them. It was a process that took 15 to 20 minutes to place young people taking the written exam, as well as prohibiting applicants from entering with backpacks or personal belongings. Young people could only enter with their sports clothing. The security measures and note-taking to evaluate applicants from the beginning were among the most demanding. This is because the school had a reputation to maintain, which was the answer to the low admission rate. While in another part of the institution, more specifically in an office, the eighth wearer was seen in his normal form sitting on a metal and plastic waiting chair. In fact, he was the only one in the room, along with a secretary who was around 35 years old. The employee was shaped like a fish and had a kind of aquatic necklace. The woman was wearing a common bluish office suit. The man around 40 waited patiently with 2 empty chairs next to him, until the woman spoke when she saw her cell phone. Mr. Toshinori Yagi, Director Nezu will receive you now, the woman said in a friendly tone, while the puny man stood and thanked him. The blonde went and opened a door at the back of the room. Upon entering the director's office, the professional hero saw a large desk and multiple paintings of various things, from one of some dogs playing poker, as well as a recreation of the famous scene from Georges Méliès' Man in the Moon, where the rocket was inserted into the eye of the moon, as well as some awards and recognitions that were in a small bookcase, in addition to having several shelves full of all kinds of books. Toshinori, I'm glad you could come. Sit down, a somewhat high-pitched voice spoke, but in a quite friendly tone, behind a small chair that was on a large desk. That curiously she had a smaller desk on said desk. The pro-hero obeyed and sat in one of the chairs with the desk in front of him. Almost instantly caused a kind of chimera between mouse, bear or dog. He turned around from his chair, facing the human. His fur was white and he wore a scar over his right eye, as well as he wore a tailored suit with a blue vest over it. The issue of quirks was a rare condition, since some animals had developed human characteristics, just as some humans acquired animal traits with the arrival of these abilities. Good afternoon, Director Nezu, I came to talk about. Before being able to continue, the small anthropomorphic being interrupted the person he had mentioned. Yes, I know. Just tell me if you accept the job. You are actually very qualified for the subject of teaching classes on the administration of hero agencies, the director said without giving much importance to the subject. He had to be present within an hour at the practical exam. Well, I would like it. Only, I would do it like in my normal way. This way, the professional hero commented a little embarrassed. Is it because of? The talking mouse asked for the first time, seeing the hero seriously. Yes, I can't keep in shape for a long time a day. And the short time I can keep it, I would like to do it to continue helping as a hero. The so-called #1 hero responded a little sadly. He didn't want it to be interpreted as putting on some whim or rule for accepting the job. I understand. Having all might in UA would have its advantages and disadvantages. On the one hand, I offered you the job because I know that your experience in the field can help the new generations a lot. On the other hand, you become increasingly weaker with the subject of your quirk. It would be a way to protect you, the director said in a sincere tone, because All Might had supported several students, and not only from the academy where he was director, also to other students from other schools who aspired to be heroes. The little being did not want him to be left alone as many heroes grow older. It wasn't much, but he wanted to show her that it could still be useful. I know and I appreciate it very much. Just maybe I should start getting more used to this way. Besides, I wouldn't like it if someone wanted to attack the school for me. He spoke with a tone full of all kinds of feelings. We have had important heroes before teaching classes. No one in their right mind would attack you, the little mouse said with a tone of pride. There are always very crazy people out there who think they have something to prove. The professional hero responded, thinking about everything the professional hero had experienced in his years of service. The students can be difficult to say the least. Many kids come in wanting to take on the world because they think that their quirk can handle everyone, and they feel invincible. The director commented in a reflective tone. It's normal, I was also young, he said, challenging the director's comment a little. The students can be cretins. He had finally said the word he didn't want to say, because he knew it would be frowned upon by many figures inside and outside the school. For his part, the professional hero only saw the director somewhat confused, which kept talking. I know that this conversation will not come from here, but I have seen it all. Many teachers have had to deal with students in very complex ways. Some think that their quirk surpasses that of their teacher and they challenge them to different battles, or they try to make them look bad whenever they can. I say this because at least like All Might they could respect you, even when your quirk disappears. Like Toshinori, they only you see like someone to try to intimidate. Not all students are like that. There are very good prospects in third year, the director said worriedly. It was the other part that made him feel uneasy about the professional hero accepting the job under his guise of civil, to put it in some way. For his part, the blonde-haired man only meditated on what the mouse was saying, and remembered the last conversation he had with his former partner. Perhaps today they still had several differences, but that's it. He was the only person he could accept to absorb agency from him. At least he knew that he would respect the social support he gave. I know I have to change the way I do things. I will find some way to do it right, said the man with the bull buckle, looking at the small rodent. I know. Your class is functional in the general blocks of second and third year. As I say, in the third year there are not so many problems. Maybe one or another renegade from the second year. The director spoke, seeing the so-called #1 hero. There was a lot of trust between the two, more so since he himself revealed that he could not be All Might as a teacher. At school, in the first years, I thought I would give them some class, she asked, a little confused, because of what they had talked about a few weeks ago. Oh, that. We had a program change at the school. Finally, the board of directors allowed me to install my test program. We will test it with this year's new students. If it is functional, we will begin to establish it for future generations and improving it in the process, the little mouse said quite happily, as if he were talking about a prank that had gone well. Wait, is the program changing? The professional hero asked, even more confused. Since he had studied at school, there had not been many changes. In reality, the UA system was rigid, but at the same time very functional in quality. Something like this. The subjects are going to be maintained. We want to continue adding those that we consider most useful, as always. However, for some time now I realized that separating the hero course into class A and B is no longer so functional. So that's why I decided to create 3 groups for the hero course. As I said, this year will be the test. The speaking being responded quite happily at being able to share part of his plan. Wait, are they going to expand the number of heroes that enter the school? He responded with a question, even more surprised by the change. No way. When you studied here, the hero courses accepted 20 to 25 students. That has been the norm until today, giving a total of 40 to 50 students entering per course. But given the current climate, I want to improve and make the education a little more personalized. That's why this year will perhaps be the most rigorous to qualify the applicants, the director said, quite animated. Wait, how many students do you want there to be per group in the hero course? He asked again. The surprises for the blonde did not stop. 10 to 15 students per class. 10 is the minimum accepted and 15 is the maximum allowed. Of course, there is some flexibility. Yes, we see certain students with potential, but my desire is to keep the groups smaller. It has been shown that this greatly improves the quality of learning. In addition, classes A, B, and C, they will be filled with certain students in a specific way. At least that is the main change I proposed for the hero course. Wait until you see the others. The little being spoke quite satisfied. Do you propose that the maximum number of students per hero course will be 45? He asked, even more surprised. Yes, as I said, exaggerating. Many teachers made that face. Furthermore, it will be better to personalize the students like this. One group will have students who have high skills with their quirks, but perhaps they will have to improve the social aspect. Another will be with those who are at an intermediate point, and another will be exclusively for students with great potential, but who lack control of their quirks. The idea is to better identify the profiles of each student so that they develop their skills. I know it sounds a bit ambitious, but I would like to leave a good legacy at the school. That is why it is vitally important that I appear for today's exam on time. Do you want to come see what the exam will be like, Professor Toshinori? The little director asked quite happily. On the other hand, the same pro-hero had just been worried about what the little being had just said. Perhaps he should have supervised his pupil to use his quirk before the exam. The blonde mused to himself, but he wanted to think that the quirk would work the same as it did with him in the past, that somehow Izuku's body would accept the power. As in his case, Midoriya would enter the intermediate class or with those who should improve socially. That's what the professional hero wanted to think, but he quickly answered the director so as not to be so exposed. After all, only 4 people knew how his quirk worked 100%. Of course, director, it would be an honor. The professional hero and now teacher responded a little worried. Great, let's talk about the fees, schedules, and the other points of the job. The director concluded while the young aspiring heroes prepared to answer their written exam. Practical exam. Part 1. A digital clock showed 11 a.m., but on this occasion said device was hanging on a wall in the open in view of all the aspiring heroes who continued with the exam. Below the clock there was a large platform set up as a stage, which was covered with fabrics along with some decorations at the base and on it. In the center of the stage there was a small stage, also removable. Its colors were white for the base and blue at the top. Between the clock and the stage there was a fairly large tarp hanging that had perhaps been used for a few years, but you couldn't tell because of how well cared it was. The canvas had large letters printed on it that said, UA Practical Exam. For its part, a large number of applicants in all kinds of shapes and sizes, which will be very complex to describe and list at a glance. They were outside waiting, looking in the direction of the stage. Only now they all had some kind of digital watch on their wrists. The place where the teenagers were could be called a kind of paved field, which was approximately the size of a large stadium. But for Izuku everything was very big. He couldn't help but feel intimidated the more he got to know the facilities. It seemed like a mini-city within the city. The young man tried to distract himself by thinking about his theoretical exam. It was easy for him. Several questions came in the guide sent by the institution in the email, but there were also questions that did not come. The advantage of him was knowing historical data of several heroes of yesteryear in the some questions of the exam. For the green-haired boy, everything went very quickly. At 9:30 a.m. the written exam began. After those in charge of supervising the test accommodated everyone who participated in the evaluation, which lasted about an hour. Immediately at 10:30 a.m. an alarm sounded and everyone was asked to stop responding. Just as no one took pencils or pens from the institution, the freckled boy obeyed, but he noticed how some of his classmates kept said supplies with the engraved logos of the school in their pants or jacket pockets. The young man remembered how he tried to buy a school pen online, something he did not succeed in. It was an auction that rose like the foam of shaken soft drinks. He now understood where the feathers from those auctions came from, as well as their collection value for certain sectors of society. These fanatical people obtained all kinds of items related to the world of heroes. However, the young man was still nervous. For his good luck he had not run into Bakugo, but he had not seen the young woman who helped him when he entered the school, as well as Shishida. Almost immediately the supervisors sat him away, just as the hairy teenager had commented. He also did not see any of the classmates with whom he had to sit to answer the written exam. In itself, the freckled man felt like he was in a constant roulette wheel, and every time he finished spinning he saw new people, but it immediately turned again to put him in front of new faces. But before he could continue reflecting on the school's evaluation methods, a voice that seemed familiar took him out of it. "Welcome young people to the practical part of your evaluation," he said very animatedly out loud and without a microphone. A white-skinned man with blonde hair combed upwards. The man was wearing sunglasses along with small mustaches protruding from the sides of the upper part of his mouth. His clothing consisted of black clothing, as if he was wearing leather pants and a leather jacket, as well as short gloves. The man had some kind of weird mask hanging around his neck, like it was some kind of portable amplifier. However, he did not use it since he made himself heard very well. The green-haired young man was surprised to see the one he thought was a teacher, who had reprimanded him in the hallway. But the man continued talking without stopping. How young people will know when they finish their exam. All the supervisors did not let them leave the auditorium without giving them the watch they were carrying, he said, still very enthusiastically from the improvised stage. Most of the young people, including the freckled one, raised their wrist where they were wearing the watch and looked at it. They can't keep it, the professor said in a dry tone, causing a series of complaints from various parts of the crowd, which ranged from, "They are stingy at UA. How is it possible that they check you for a simple pencil? In Shiksu they let you keep the pens. Why are they very demanding?" The complaints from several applicants continued, and some let their quirks be released. Izuku was able to see how a student many meters away made several fireworks explode above his head. Another splashed jets of water, disturbing several young people who were beginning to complain. He also saw one raise a large amount of smoke that covered a group of teenagers. Finally, he heard a familiar shout, "Shut up, you bastards!" And he saw several explosions over the heads of several of the candidates almost at the front of the stage. "I already know where Bakugo is," he said in a discouraged tone and under his green hair. But before anyone else could say anything, a large voice could be heard shouting, "SILENCOOO." The scream did not pierce the ears or rupture the eardrums, but the teenager felt how it unbalanced him and gave him a feeling of dizziness, even though he squeezed his ears tightly to try to block out the noise of the scream. But it was useless. The dizziness continued. Izuku had closed his eyes almost at the moment of the scream, which prevented him from realizing that he was not the only one in this condition. There were few applicants left with one or both eyes open. After a few seconds, some students fell unconscious. Seconds passed like long minutes as the professor's scream began to disappear. For his part, the freckled man felt his head spinning. He could hear a small hiss in both ears and his vision had become blurry. In his stomach he felt like vomiting the little breakfast he had inside him. However, he only felt something slimy on his right shoe. When he turned around, he saw a fellow applicant kneeling on the floor trying to stay conscious, but taking everything he had out of his stomach. This scene gave him an even greater feeling of nausea. He himself felt the little fruit and juice that he had eaten for breakfast, on the advice of the professional hero, accumulate in his throat, but he quickly tried to swallow it. Under other circumstances, an annoyance would have invaded him, because his favorite tennis shoes that he didn't even wear to high school had just been stained, to prevent Bakugo or any of the students who were bothering him from harming them, in addition to the fact that the effect of dizziness and nausea prevented him from having any emotion. Daze dominated his body. As his sight began to return better, he could look around him. He realized that many students were already on the floor, in conditions similar to his aspiring classmate or even completely knocked out. Izuku couldn't help but have a surprised face as he felt like he was short of breath. He never really knew how many candidates had taken the exam, but he was sure that he saw half of all those who took the written exam lying on the floor unable to stand up, just like the other part of the aspirants who were barely fighting to stay conscious. "Sorry about your tennis shoes. Please help me stop. I don't want to be expelled from the test without having tried," a young black-haired man said in a pleading tone. When the green-haired young man turned around again, he saw that the other teenager had a similar height to him, as well as having dark skin, and was wearing a brown jacket and sports pants of the same color, just as he was wearing white tennis shoes. Izuku tried to help his partner to stand up. However, the entire event was seen from a special room in another part of the school. The room was quite large. It looked like an auditorium, only smaller than the place where the written test had been taken. There were a series of seats at the front that had been occupied by various visiting professors and pro-heroes. These seats had a folding wooden table where there were tablets, cell phones, or even some adventurers who preferred a notebook and pen. This group of people paid a lot of attention since in front of all the seats there was a large screen, which was fragmented into many smaller screens, showing the different candidates in various positions and scenarios. For its part, in the back seats Toshinori could be seen even in his civilian appearance. He, like many people who filled the other seats in the room, were only there as guests. They couldn't speak, unless one of the teachers or professional heroes who were in charge of grading asked for an extra opinion, which had everyone paying close attention to the screens. Although the blonde himself knew that it would be hypocritical to maintain objectivity after the professor's shout, he himself looked for his protégé, praying that he was not part of those knocked out. Although a light and almost imperceptible sigh came out of his mouth as he saw the green-haired man for a moment helping to stop a young man next to him. But the tension in the room was broken for a moment when one of the guests raised his voice to ask something. "Principal Nezu, how many candidates took the test this year?" A man in a very fine grayish suit with a tie in a similar tone asked in a formal tone. The little director had a special seat, in a row in the center, just one row behind those in charge of grading. Next to the little thinking being there are also many teachers from the school. The small anthropomorphic being, without losing his sharp tone, responded quite seriously. A little more than 12,000. The little being responded to ask another teacher something else. Professor 𝗵𝗲, how many students are out of the test? However, the answer came from the back of the room, where a group of people monitored tablets to measure the responses of the watches. In this way, notify if any applicant was in danger. According to the current data, President Mike shot down around 5,000 applicants, and the number continues to rise. At the moment, there are a little more than 7,000 conscious. The paramedics have already been notified to take the knocked out young people. Concluded a red-haired man with glasses, that he was wearing some pretty dirty jeans suspenders with a green t-shirt underneath, as well as some brown boots in very similar conditions. Thank you. As you can see, the medical team has already been notified. The little director concluded, while a woman in a suit resembling an astronaut spoke in a low voice to the small animal. Very kind for answering my question and sorry for the interruption. The man in the suit commented still kindly, which belonged to the 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳 group. For his part, the blonde continued watching the split screen. For a moment he thought about what he had said on one occasion on the beach to the new heir of One for All. Never underestimate a quirk, no matter how small it may seem to you. Even if you master it 100%, the One for All. You can, young Midoriya, he said in a very low tone and with a serious look the eighth bearer. For its part, in the field where the young people were, there had been a change of panorama, since there was more space between the applicants. At the professor's request, no one was to leave their place. Almost immediately, many paramedics arrived to pick up the knocked-out teenagers, as well as others who could barely stand. Izuku only remembered how his partner who helped him stop was escorted away in tears, just like many others. The green-haired man was impressed to see so many knocked-out young people being taken away as if nothing had happened. He compared that image with what he could see on some faces when they entered the academy, since many were overflowing with joy and encouragement. But now the atmosphere felt tense. Many young people were quiet and looked nervous. Himself was no exception. The freckled man couldn't stand it if no one said anything. However, a voice took him out of himself once again. "Excuse me, kid," said a tall man in a kind of white uniform. I passed through Izuku's line in a quick and somewhat abrupt manner. The green-haired young man turned to the paramedic's back. He saw how he carried a young man of very short stature, unconscious and somewhat chubby. His hairstyle looked like he had a lot of grapes. He was also wearing sports clothes. This image only contributed to making the young man of the Midoriya family even more nervous. The teenager wondered, how the hell did everything happen so fast? But not even he could reflect on his own question, because a familiar voice sounded again in the field. "Well, young people, I did not have the intention to do a test to reduce the number of applicants. It is common for this to happen every year of entrance exams. But I am the type of teacher who does not like to do those types of acts. Now, without interruptions, I will proceed to explain the test. If someone interrupts me, they are automatically disqualified. By the way, all those who made a fuss with their quirks have less than 2,000 points in the test," the professor concluded somewhat triumphantly, while all the teenagers remained silent, no matter how frustrated they felt. "The test they will do will be very simple, close to here. We have the city stadium," the professor said with a quirk of voice, pointing to a stadium several meters away, causing many applicants to cast their eyes on that building. "In said stadium, you will have to face a series of robots like these," he said, pointing with his right hand to one side of the stage, causing 3 androids with rusty metal casings and 6 feet tall to take the stage. They all had an eye in the center of their heads. The only difference was that one had yellow, another had blue, and the last one was finally green. These androids will act as villains as well as other models hidden in the stadium. The only thing they will have in common is the color of their eyes. The blue ones are worth 100 points, the yellow ones are worth 300, and finally the green ones are worth 500 points. Although of course if you find a colossal robot, those are worth 1,000 points. Although I don't advise challenging them, they are very difficult to beat. And if they manage to make improvised teams or pairs to beat any robot, your points will be divided among those who have contributed to destroying a robot, the professor said quite cheerfully. But this only raised more questions from the students, including in the same green hair, that he wondered, how would they take control of the situation? Returning to the topic of watches, these will be responsible for monitoring your heart rate, as well as other vital signs. They will also keep track of the points they make. They also have a system to determine if an applicant knocks out or attacks another. If so, the applicant who attacks will be immediately disqualified regardless of the points they have. Don't start fights among yourselves. If you become unconscious, your stitches will remain intact, but the medical team will enter the scene to remove you from the stadium. At the end of that part, everyone saw their watch on their wrists again. To finish, the city stadium is a recreation of several cities. In this case, we will measure your abilities in case of an attack by villains. Don't worry, no one can get hurt. Apart from destroying robots, there are several test dummies scattered throughout the city. Rescuing them will cost you around 500 points, but they must take them to the safe areas also scattered throughout the city. Only then will their watches show that score. There are a few more ways to get points, but that will depend on your experience in the test. For this practical part you will only have 45 minutes. Follow the school staff. They separate you into groups. The blonde-haired teacher concluded. This caused all the candidates to be quite perplexed by the test. Although all the young people were mentally focused on what was to come, they were all clear, make the most points once inside the stadium. For its part, from the room where the practical test was evaluated, a person in the guest seats threw a comment into the air. These young people must surely be thinking that what will help them pass will be the points. A hero in his heroic suit said in a very confident and boastful tone, which consisted of a bandana as a mask, as well as a tight-fitting suit with a cape behind it. The man, around 25, was wearing boots and white gloves. Luckily for 𝗧𝗵𝗲, he had him sitting next to him. For his part, the blonde only remained silent, analyzing the situation. He had heard rumors that the exams at UA had changed since 𝗂𝗧𝗏 was director, but now he understood the purpose of the exam and its design. He was not focused on making points so that applicants with the highest scores will earn a direct pass as students. The exam in every sense was planned to evaluate the profiles of the applicants, and thus determine if they are viable hero students. Although, of course, the points will have their weight when it comes to qualifying. You skinny guy, who invited you? The hero with the bandana mask said once again animatedly, causing 𝗧𝗵𝗲 annoyance, since they were not supposed to speak during the evaluation. You are supposed to remain silent while they do the test. The blonde concluded in a low but somewhat firm tone. I know, but I'm here because my agency recommended it to me. I mean, I need to clean up my image a little, since the International Hero Club scandal. The professional hero said in a lower tone. Wait a minute. The man wearing a white shirt said quite firmly and a little annoyed. Surely you saw the news. The bitter endeavor arrived, and far from stopping because there were several heroes in the club, he arrested us all. But if you ask me, he envies us. I am in position number 50. Very soon I will reach the top 10. The man in the bandana concluded quite energetically. We are part of the evaluation. Try not to make noise, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said now, more annoyed, since he had identified the 25-year-old young adult. He was a hero known as Bandana Man. He always appeared in the news, magazines, and websites, but not for the most heroic or appropriate reasons. However, several companies supported him, and the agency where he worked did his work relatively well. However, he was always involved in scandals of all kinds. Come on, Skinny, have a little fun. We all know that when these young people go out into the world, they are going to have to do everything so that people recognize them as heroes. Do you know what young people want to see today? Real heroes, who are themselves, not unattainable sanctimonious people like 𝗂𝗍𝗲, he said, still in a low tone so that they wouldn't take him out of the test. For his part, the eighth bearer only ignored the comment. Oh, I see that you are a fan of Mr. Muscles. He saves everyone with a smile, he said in a low tone, but with the intention of seeing his partner say something. I work at your agency, the professional hero said, somewhat annoyed in his civilian form, hoping that his partner would be ashamed and silent with that comment. Oh, better, man. My agency has been insisting to 𝗂𝗍𝗲 that we do a commercial for months. I can introduce you to someone. She's as beautiful as any model. She's not demanding at all. And maybe you. Can you turn a page? Someone from the agency. Do you know what I mean? The young hero said shamelessly. For his part, the blonde only remained even more silent. While he sought to appease his annoyance, he understood why no one in his agency had told him the information. They knew him quite a bit in that sense. Oh, I got it, Skinny. Do you have other tastes? Don't worry, I have it covered, he said even more shamelessly, but keeping his tone low as the man with the bandana that covered part of his face. However, the one wearing the bull buckle still said nothing. Now he understood Torino's constant complaints with the news he heard about the new heroes. Oh, I understand. You're one of those guys who thinks a lot just because you work in an agency of a popular professional hero. Well, I have news for you. 𝗂𝗍𝗲 is a relic of the past, a generation that will soon leave us. And when that old man, it's useless to stop playing the self-righteous person. You're going to lose your job, and you're going to remember this moment. When you would have helped me, I would return the favor one day. The young adult concluded in an annoyed tone. What is the name of your agency? The blonde asked angrily. You see it. It's better for good. 𝗧𝗏𝗍 Justice. The young woman's name is. The young hero said in a triumphant tone. But now he was silenced by the man around 40 years old. You don't need to return the favor, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said in a serious tone that for a moment intimidated the young man next to him. The blonde turned his attention to the front again, realizing that the young people were already separated in various areas of the stadium. For a moment he took a deep breath. The eighth bearer, he recognized it. Somehow he was a little nervous for his pupil, but he wanted to trust that he was ready. It was a very hard year of training for the green-haired man. Meanwhile, 𝗧𝗂 was at one of the entrances to the stadium. He, along with several young people, were heading to the city to take the practical exam. Once again, he felt the nerve in his stomach. The green-haired man looked in all directions to try to calm down, but it was in vain. Since he was closest to the center of a company made up of young people his age with multiple shapes and sizes, that simply intimidated him more. It seemed that they had purposely placed him with companions who didn't look the least bit phased. One of the organizers of the practical exam addressed the candidates. "Remember the rules. You only have 45 minutes. If someone has a difficulty, press the code on your watch," said a man around 20 years old dressed in a blue suit that covered his entire body, but his sleeves reached his elbows. Plus, he was wearing white tennis shoes. For their part, several of the trained young people only nodded their heads. A few seconds later, an alarm began to sound throughout the stadium. The tone was fast but very loud, like a police or ambulance siren, but without changes in volume and tones. Only a constant, dry noise could be heard. Almost immediately, an electronic door opened in front of the young people. 𝗧𝗂 never realized if he ran out of inertia or because he unconsciously felt pushed by his companion. Since the young people were aware that they were a few meters away from the entrance, the company began to dissolve with everyone running in different directions. For his part, the green-haired man only avoided his companions so as not to collide with them. In the blink of an eye, the 15-year-old was left alone and static, seeing everything around him. It was a recreation of a very large city, but many buildings looked destroyed or had holes. It looked like a war zone like those seen in movies or newsreels. However, the green-haired man breathed as deeply as he could while releasing a powerful sigh. He didn't know how to feel, until a loud noise shook him out of himself again. In the distance, the teen could see an explosion. For a moment, he thought about 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏, but he quickly dismissed the idea when another explosion sounded near the area where he was. The freckled man identified it as part of the test, since these controlled explosions did not generate any fire or sparks, but there was a large amount of white smoke added to the vibrations on the floor that they generated. The boy only began to run in confusion through the city built for the test. The first thing that occurred to him was to look for rescue dolls. It would be a good way to get points. However, that idea was quickly discarded when he passed by a somewhat damaged wall. This structure was gray with a lot of dirt, but 𝗧𝗂 did not pay attention to the details of the recreation of the city, which were very faithful to those of a damaged zone. What surprised the green-haired boy was how a mechanical hand crossed the wall like if nothing, trying to catch it. The young aspiring hero jumped back in the opposite direction to which he was running. The ninth wearer had a mixture of fear and uncertainty as he saw how the hand that had gone through the concrete was increasing in size, revealing an android similar to the ones he had seen quite a few minutes ago on the platform. 𝗧𝗂 was able to shine a large yellow eye where he saw his scared face reflected, but the android walked without stopping slowly towards the young man, causing his footsteps to leave an echo in the area where he was. The green-haired man looked determinedly at the android for a moment, quickly clenching his right fist. The first thing that came to mind was to throw a punch at the android's head. The young man only imitated a pose of his mentor by retracting his right fist as far as his body would allow and putting his left foot in front. "Texas smash," the young man shouted at the top of his lungs, quickly throwing his right fist against the robot. Almost out of inertia, the young man had closed his eyes at the moment of impact. In fact, it was common when he threw punches or when he tried to defend himself. 𝗧𝗂 was not one to get into fights. He even threw a few punches to defend himself from the troublemakers, but it almost always ended with him on the floor being beaten by his bullies. But the green-haired boy hoped that he would be different this time, since now he had a quirk. The freckled man opened his eyes slowly until a feeling of surprise and uncertainty invaded him. The teenager felt a strong pain in his fist that was still connected to the robot's head. However, he had not flinched in the slightest. 𝗧𝗂 only saw his scared face once again in the robot's eye, causing the young man, even in his state of uncertainty, to take several steps back. However, the robot continued walking slowly towards. 𝗧𝗂 quickly thought about kicking the android's chest with the soles of her shoes. Action she performed immediately, but the result was the same, although she did not feel as much pain as when he hit her with his hand. When the young man regained his balance from the kick, he saw the android still walking slowly, while the sound of the rusty metal parts and his footsteps were the only thing that could be heard for the green-eyed man. A familiar voice sounded in the stadium, which was heard by all the candidates. "Young people, if you look at the screens on the ceiling, you will see the scores of the top 10. By the way, 1,000 applicants have so far been captured," President Mike's voice said in a simple tone, caused the green-haired boy to reflexively turn the screens. For a moment he was surprised, since he saw that 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗏 was in position 10 with a little more than 15,000 points. "What the hell?" the teenager said to himself, surprised and upset. He thought about it for a minute. His schoolmate supposedly had started with 2,000 points less because of his start in taking the written exam. But the green-haired boy was abruptly taken out of his thoughts when he felt that something was grabbing him tightly. From one moment to the next, the young man was lifted from the ground and abruptly thrown several meters away. The freckled man, still stunned by the blow, tried to stand up, while he watched the android in front of him lower his arms and resume his slow march against the young man in the sports jacket. Izuku had a mixture of frustration and anger. He felt that everything he had done in the year had been for nothing. He didn't know how to activate the One for All, just as he didn't understand what was happening. In every way he felt like a fish out of water. Although he quickly realized that the robots most likely had the function of knocking out the applicants and taking them away captured, the young man tried to stand as best he could, although he staggered a little in the process. The green-haired man looked forward again, to realize that his metallic opponent was getting closer and closer to him. However, the teenager once again did the first thing that occurred to him. The boy in the now somewhat dirty blue jacket began to run as fast as he could from the android. The green-haired man had the idea that androids only walked. But very soon he would realize that he was wrong. For now he heard a faster and more constant sound of metal behind him. At no time did the teenager want to turn back. He knew that he would see that big yellow eye that only reflected his fears and uncertainties. However, the green-eyed man only felt something pulling him by the collar of his jacket. This grip threw him away again, only now on the left side and not in front as it happened before. The young man from the Midoriya family only spun several times on the ground of the city. A few seconds passed when he finally stopped. He could feel several scratches on his arms and legs. When he looked at himself for a moment, he was able to see that his jacket had a hole in his left elbow, as well as some in his pants. He quickly returned his gaze to the robot in front of him. It was walking slowly again, letting only his footsteps be the only sound in the place. Izuku, with an anguished face, tried to stand up, but he fell to the floor due to the daze of the blow. He quickly began to crawl backwards while he was sitting on his backside. In this process, a couple of tears of frustration and pain began to form in his eyes, repeating the scene in which he saw himself reflected in the android's eye. True courage is found between cowardice and recklessness. Miguel de Cervantes' practical exam. Part 2. Everything seemed to indicate that the robot was reacting to the applicant's responses. Izuku kept crawling on his hands and on his backside as far back as he could, until he finally felt how he lightly bumped his back against a solid structure. The green-haired man turned around for a moment and realized that there was a piece of wall behind him. He turned both sides, although he had somewhere to run to. That would only repeat the previous event, where the robot surpassed his speed. The ninth wielder knew it. This was the end and he would fail the exam. He did not want to imagine All Might's disappointed face when he saw that he could not activate his quirk to defeat a simple robot. The young man only listened to the slow steps of the android getting closer and closer to him. He knew that it would knock him out or something like that, to finally take him away from the stadium. Izuku looked at the android's eye again, only to see the same expression of fear and uncertainty from him, something that reminded him of his quirkless status and the constant ridicule of most of his classmates, a constant throughout his life. Despite the training, he felt that nothing had changed. The green-eyed man, even with several tear ducts coming out of his eyes, only saw the rusty android in front of him, which slowly brought his hand closer to grab the young man. However, the green-haired man only heard a dry knock. In a matter of seconds, all you could hear was how the android's head fell, bouncing across the floor, sending many sparks flying from what could be called its neck, while the yellow eye that still reflected Izuku was losing its color until it became completely black. The freckled man only noticed how the android's body fell in front of him, while many sparks emanated from the part where the head should be. If you were going to be terrified, you would have faked fainting when the teacher used his scream, a voice said in a serious and somewhat contemptuous tone. This act caused the young man of the Midoriya family to turn to the origin of the voice, seeing in front of him a taller young man. He was wearing a white sports shirt along with sports shorts that reached his knee. The teenager was not wearing socks, but he was wearing white tennis shoes. Something curious was that some kind of tubes emanated from the lower part of his legs. The young man with a firm voice had glasses, which reflected the green-haired man's surprised face, as well as a blue-side combed ponytail, which was originally more groomed. However, from the short time he had spent in the exam, he looked a little disheveled, as well as quite a bit of dirt, construction dust, and oil on his clothing, as well as exposed body parts. But Izuku didn't respond. He just lowered his gaze to the floor. The young man wearing the blue jacket felt very sorry at that moment. I don't know what game you're playing, but all of us who came here, we're taking the exam because we want to be heroes, and that means something. If you don't feel respect for the job, just look for another profession. You're not cut out for this. The teenager spoke again in a contemptuous tone focused on his companion, which made none of the young people realize that the watch he had glasses on showed 2,000 extra points. But the blue-haired young man left immediately without saying anything else. I wanted to take advantage of the remaining time. In the blink of an eye, the teenager was lost running at high speed, while some smoke emanated from the tubes in his legs. For his part, Izuku was left with a hint of annoyance looking at the floor, while he slammed his closed right fist, hitting the hypothetical part hard on the floor. He almost immediately wiped the sleeve of his jacket while he closed his eyes to clean himself without rubbing too hard. This caused a little burning to appear in his eyes. The freckled man looked at the screens and saw the scores again. Bakugo was now in 8th position. The green-eyed boy looked at his watch only to see that it said 0 points, as well as 35 minutes left. The young man only let out a sigh, while he repeated himself, I have to try. Even somewhat dazed, he began to stand up, while he began to jog through the big city. Once again the controlled explosions were repeated in the area, but the green-haired man had to concentrate and ignore them despite the nerves they generated. For their part, in the room where they evaluated the practical exam, the blonde watched several screens. He had answered some questions from some examiners. However, he still had not found young Midoriya, until he heard Bandana Man's voice again. Hey director, can we fail the green-haired freckled guy? The young professional hero spoke in a haughty tone and without considerations, causing Toshinori to turn to his partner for a moment and then face forward, waiting for the director's response. For his part, the small anthropomorphic being was forced to watch the video along with everyone in the room, in case a student had done something improper. Did you see his number? Is it at the bottom of the screen? The director asked seriously without losing attention to other students. Yes, 7714, the young hero responded quite confidently. This caused the director to ask that part of the screen focus on the student's watch. From one moment to the next, everyone in the room saw the ninth wearer in his failed attempt to confront the robot, as well as how he fled from it and the arrival from another aspirant to save him. You see, a useless man like that has no material to be a hero. The 25-year-old man spoke angrily. For his part, the 8th bearer had a hint of mixed emotions. Didn't he understand what was happening? Why didn't young Midoriya activate the quirk? The blonde professional hero continued to question several things, until he heard the small director's high-pitched voice. Bandana Man, I know that you are taking the exam at the request of the agency where you work, but please save us from wasting time with the applicant's failures. At the end of the test it will be determined who passes or fails. Just stop bothering your colleagues who are trying to do their job. Was I clear? The small rodent concluded in a firm tone, causing the reckless hero to remain silent. Toshinori, for his part, began to worry about Izuku. He knew that even though the video was downplayed by the director, it could have a negative effect on the young man by the time he qualified. All kinds of emotions appeared in the older hero, but he should continue concentrating on doing his job in the exam. Perhaps at the end of all this, he should talk to his young apprentice. Back at the stadium, the green-haired young man still had mixed feelings about what had happened recently. He was jogging along a street with several battered buildings. Only now he was carrying an exam test dummy on his back, the teenager gasping as he was amazed at how big the stadium was. In truth, he had not yet come across any boundary wall except at the beginning of the test when he entered the facility. At the moment he had not encountered any more robots. However, the freckled man had been looking for some test dummies for about 10 minutes, which had gotten him some points. At least with the one he carried on his back there were already 3. He had seen several applicants placed in a motorless ambulance, which served as an interactive exhibit for the test. However, it was closed due to having a certain limit of dolls, which caused everyone to look for other ambulances. Izuku was surprised when he saw a doll lying in what was a kind of recreation of a store, which had a small shelf of candy on it. He was able to quickly move the shelf and place the doll on his back, although he wandered a bit to find a safe area, until he saw several applicants also carrying their respective risk figures, heading without deviations to a specific place. As he followed them, he saw how the applicants left the dolls in another modified car, although he was surprised that several participants, instead of receiving 500 points, got less. For his part, the green-haired man had loaded and deposited his own dummies twice before, which gave him 250 points for each one, which left him surprised on the first try and a little frustrated on the second try. Apparently there was a test system with these that qualified the way in which they were delivered, and by his third figure he had better understood how the system worked. The young man carefully placed his doll, waiting for his watch. Finally the device showed 500 extra points, which gave a total of 1,000 points. A slight smile appeared on the young man's face until he briefly turned his gaze to the screen, which concluded in a deep sigh, although his attention quickly fell on several of his classmates who were making a commotion. He was now surprised to hear from a young man with black hair that a young applicant had obtained 700 points. Several of his classmates asked him, "How did you do it?" To which the young woman had responded that she only spoke as if she was trying to calm them down, as if they were real people. The green-haired boy better understood the professor's words with a voice quirk when he heard that explanation. If there were several ways to earn points outside of the ones they had mentioned, the green-haired man turned to the vehicle and saw that it still had capacity for several dolls. So without wasting time, he moved to look for another mannequin and implement what the girl commented. He had to take advantage of the fact that this ambulance had not yet closed, although it would not be for long. It didn't take long for the green-haired man to see a mannequin lying in an alley. He just proceeded with caution. He remembered that a classmate was full of flour and that had taken away about 1,000 points, according to what he said. When he picked up the doll, after a few seconds it exploded. Apparently he had a kind of belt that made him different from the others. So far the young man had come across 3 different belts, all of some color from the robot's eyes. But this one was green, being the second one that was in that color, the green-haired one. He still didn't understand if the belts represented an injury or something else. But the freckled man wasn't going to waste time reflecting. He needed to use the few minutes he had left intelligently. The young man from the 𝗵𝗃 family continued on his way while he spoke to the rather nervous mannequin to calm him down. In a few minutes he was already halfway to the ambulance. However, a pleading voice made the green-haired man stop and begin to search with his eyes for the origin of said voice. This continued for a few seconds until he heard another quite familiar noise. It was a sound very similar to the robot he had encountered before. A cold bead of sweat ran down the right side of his head, but he quickly heard the voice again. "Please help." It was a male voice unknown to the young man. The green-haired man remained static when he heard her again, while his teeth closed together tightly. At the same time he squeezed the mannequin with great pressure. "Ignore him," the young man repeated to himself as he turned around and headed back to the ambulance. "Help," his test partner shouted again in a more desperate tone. For his part, the green-haired man stopped again while he heard the voice again. "You are a clumsy 𝗧𝗍𝗂," the young man repeated himself while leaving the mannequin lying on the floor. He immediately began to run to the source of the voice. On the way, the green-haired man didn't know what he would do. He only had in mind to help his partner. As he heard the voice again, he realized that he was coming from a somewhat destroyed house. As he passed through the door, the green-haired man once again ignored the extremely careful details with which the place had been designed. The house had the entrance wall knocked down and multiple pieces of electronic devices along with furniture that were also damaged. But at that moment the young man focused on the desperate voice instead of the room he was crossing. If he had paid more attention he would have realized that it belonged to a baby, but the room was quite destroyed to see with the naked eye. The green-eyed man only saw the 6-foot, rusty robot's back, but he was holding in his right metallic arm a young figure, with a height approximately that of the young man of the 𝗵𝗃 family. The freckled man was just panting. He didn't even know what light the robot had, but he had to do something. From one moment to the next the young man rushed against the robot's back trying to put a lock on its neck with all the strength he had. However, the android used his free arm and grabbed him by the back of his jacket to simply throw him in front of him. 𝗧𝗍𝗂 rolled again on the floor, remaining several meters from the robot. Upon seeing the figure closely, it was very similar to the previous one, only this one had a green eye. The young man tried to stand up again, somewhat dazed. However, in a quick movement the android carefully placed the other unconscious young man on the floor, while he fixed his eye on the green-haired boy. 𝗧𝗍𝗂 on his part began to run against the android, but he didn't even flinch and remained static. The green-haired man only thought that, one for all had to work. He now jumped up and launched a forward kick against the robot's chest, but he dodged it very easily by turning around as if a door were opening, causing the young man to crash to the floor. Even dazed by the impact, the green-eyed man felt like he was being lifted into the air by his jacket, to finally throw it again a few meters away. 𝗧𝗍𝗂, still stunned, knew he had to do something, since this robot was faster, but he was being picked up again by the back of his jacket. In a quick movement, the green-haired boy took off his jacket by opening its zipper, leaving him with a white t-shirt that had some holes due to the first encounter with the previous robot. This action caused gravity to do his work, and the young man fell to the floor, even though he was beaten, adding to how stunned he was. The green-eyed man began to crawl away from the robot due to his condition, but the teenager felt himself being grabbed by his left foot and began to be pulled towards the android. For a moment he saw his jacket on the floor next to the android, causing the young man to stretch to reach his garment. The freckled man desperately reached out his hand again and again to his jacket, something that he almost failed to take. He immediately threw his garment against the robot's face. Soon the machine released the boy, trying to tear off the jacket that had wrapped itself around his head and obstructed his view. But now the young man stood up as quickly as he could and landed behind the android. He began to pull the jacket back as if he were trying to suffocate the robot. An act that was, to say the least, useless since the machine was not breathing. However, the android placed both hands on the fabric that the young man stretched backwards, but the machine stretched it to the sides, causing this garment to tear, and with a sudden blow the teenager fell to the sitting-in floor. 𝗧𝗍𝗂 only watched as the android turned around, while throwing the remains of his garment to the sides. The young man tried to stand up, but the android pushed him to the ground again. The green-haired man did not know if his next reaction was in response to the blow or out of a desire to protect the unconscious young man, but while he was still lying on the floor, he launched a kick with the sole of his right foot. The kick went in the direction of what could be considered the knee of the machine, causing the limb of the metallic being to bend somewhat. Adding to that, several small colored lights emanated from said limb in all directions. It worked, the green-haired man said to himself, stunned, but his surprise was interrupted by the android himself. That he took it and threw it by the leg with which he had launched his kick several meters. 𝐒𝐿 received the blow to the ground again, leaving him more stunned than before. But when he turned to look at the android, he realized that he was walking with a limp due to the attack that the green-haired boy himself had caused. The teenager knew that what happened was something unexpected, but he still didn't know how to use the quirk power inherited from him. So facing the robot hand-to-hand was out of the question. The former quirkless looked for something in the scenario that would help him stop this machine. "That's," the teenager said when he saw behind him a somewhat battered wall that already had some parts of its walls fallen. The green-haired boy stood up, pretending to have a little limp, to see if he could fool the machine, which worked as best he could. He approached the wall while the android slowly shortened the distance between them. Once the freckled man was close to the structure, he looked up at the fence and realized that it was about 2 meters high. The android was still approaching slowly. Perhaps the young man was 3 meters ahead of him, but he knew that he had to do it right. The freckled man knew beforehand what the robots were capable of. The freckled man in the white shirt moved as fast as he could, surrounding the wall to finally remain behind the cracked wall, beginning to kick against it. But the wall did not flinch, which made the freckled man look frustrated, as it was still a firm structure. However, the teenager continued desperately hitting the wall with his feet, using one leg followed by the other. All the kicks he gave went squarely with the soles of his shoes. Not even the young man himself realized that his favorite tennis shoes had begun to wear out quite a bit due to all the pressure he put on them that day. Added to that, his clothes were already quite dirty, as well as his. Needless to say, the scratches on her skin and holes in his clothing were more noticeable. "Fall, fall, fall at once," he screamed with every kick he launched. However, the structure only shook a little. Just as he launched a kick with his left leg, it was no longer coming back, since a rusty metal hand had crossed the wall and taken said foot. 𝐒𝐿 was filled with fear once again. He did not want to repeat the same story against these machines. But little by little the structure began to shake. This because the machine was only going to cross it by walking. He had no other alternative. The young man saw how the structure began to collapse. So he launched a kick with his right leg. Only this time he felt a slight pain in said limb. The blow managed to push the teenager back a little, while the rubble of the wall fell hard on the robot. Everything was in the blink of an eye. However, only the green-eyed man's cry of pain was heard. The young man screamed with a face of pain while he clenched his teeth tightly. The reason was simple. Part of the structure had fallen on his left leg, which was still held by the machine for part of the time of the collapse. The young man closed one of his eyes while he felt the pain in his left limb. Although, of course, the pain in that part made him ignore the tear in his right leg. The young man, filled with the adrenaline of the moment, kicked some debris with his right limb while trying to free his left leg. Once he had removed several debris, he tried to crawl backwards with his hands and body, but he only felt great pain in his left leg. He tried for several minutes until he succeeded. The young man saw that part of his pants was quite battered. He did not know it at that moment because his garment still covered him, but his leg was very swollen. The young man tried to breathe, but it was impossible for him to ignore the pain in his leg. Finally, he no longer tried to crawl. He felt that in a short time he was going to faint. In the area, only the young man's breathing could be heard. That was until a noise was heard from the rubble, which made the teenager shudder from within. Slowly, the rubble moved, causing the android to emerge crawling. However, his condition was more deplorable. Several colored sparks could be seen emanating from his body, just as his green eye had several cracks from which a black liquid emanated. The android crawled with both front limbs as if he wanted to reach the young man. From one moment to the next, only more sparks could be heard, and as if the sound of welding emerged from the robot's hip, which caused the green-haired young man's terrified face to light up for a few moments. The machine had been cut off, since the teenager never realized that his kick had gone through the wall and hit the center of the machine, seriously damaging it. But that didn't stop the android from moving to capture the would-be hero. For his part, the green-haired young man only made a face of greater fear, while the pain merged with that feeling. He was soon trying to move in reverse to escape, but it was useless. The young man could not escape from that situation due to the damage to his body. Slowly, the robot's eye began to blink the closer he got. The young man just gritted his teeth and tried to stretch his hip as far back as he could. However, that smell of burned circuits was beginning to reach the young man. As he watched the machine's wobbly hand move closer to his face, the young man just closed his eyes, not knowing what to expect from the situation. However, only a sharp blow made a hole in the false street. For a moment the young man refused to open his eyes, as if he knew what would happen when he did so. He preferred to keep his eyes closed at that moment, as if that way he could escape the situation. But in the end nothing happened. For several seconds I waited, but nothing changed. Finally the teenager only opened his right eye to make sure what had happened. But he only saw half of the machine in front of him, which had his hand on part of his left leg. The teenager only pushed half of his body to the side with some work. Looking at the black socket that was previously a green light, the young man just sighed slowly, while his brain tried to analyze the situation. The green-haired man only looked forward, seeing the wall lying down and the other part of the robot in the rubble. He realized that perhaps he had not suffered worse damage due to a miracle. Now that he thought about it, he was very reckless, and he did not measure the consequences of this action. But the pain returned to the young man once again as he squeezed his left leg with both hands, putting a pained face on the teenager again. Many emotions were passing through the mind of the young aspiring hero, so much so that he did not notice that his watch no longer read 1,000 points, but 3,000. But before he could think about something, a voice sounded again in the stadium. "Hello, young people. Just to remind you that there are 10 minutes left of the practical exam. So far more than 4,000 applicants have been captured. I hope you didn't forget about the colossal robots." President Mike's voice concluded, causing several places in the stadium began to shake, something that did not go unnoticed by any of the applicants. From one moment to the next the floor only shook, while robots more than 30 meters high emerged from the floor of the stadium. For his part, the green-haired boy saw the scene with all his disbelief, as if they had come out of some highlight manga that his friend 𝗬𝗵𝗲 liked. But the floor vibrated slightly again with the steps taken by those metal giants. For his part, the freckled man felt the pain in his leg again and saw the general situation. Izuku felt bad in many ways for not having achieved what he set out to do. For a moment the young man thought that the quirk that had been inherited from him could balance things with other users. But the reality is that now he understood it. He had only had a quirk for a few days, while everyone here had had at least 15 years to adapt to their quirks. The young man only let out a big sigh as he looked for some way to get out of there. He didn't want the paramedics to take him away. At least he wanted to leave on his own. Or so his pride dictated to the young man. The green-haired boy tried to look for something to support himself to stand up, but he had nothing nearby, until a voice sounded a few steps away from him. "Old man, did you defeat the green robot?" said a young man with standing gray hair, who had a band over his nose. The light-skinned young man had yellow eyes and was leaning on a wooden cane. His clothing was similar to Midoriya's when he was wearing his sports jacket. Only this young man was wearing a reddish-brown one with orange boots. Izuku, for his part, saw the young man well, but after all he recognized him. He was the unconscious young man who was carrying the robot a few minutes ago. "Yes, but, wait, isn't it supposed to? What when robots knock you out? Is the medical team coming?" The green-haired man asked, confused. "Well, the robot was supposed to take me, but if you managed to wake up before, it seems like they're not coming for you." The gray-haired young man responded. "I don't understand many things about the exam." The frustrated green-haired young man responded. "Me neither. But don't worry, old man, you still have like 10 minutes. The young man from the band responded on the nose. "Hey, I can't continue anymore. I just want to go home. I don't know what happened to my leg, but it hurts a lot." The freckled man spoke quite discouraged, causing the yellow-eyed subject to feel somewhat guilty. "I'm sorry, maybe if it hadn't been for me, you would have collected more points." The other teenager commented, somewhat discouraged. No, it's I just wanted to help." Izuku responded, discouraged. "Thank you, old man." About 3 applicants passed by, 2 men and a girl, but the 3 passed me by when I asked for help. "Let me help you," the young man said as he squatted down to see Izuku's leg better. "Wait, it's not." The green-haired man spoke. However, he was interrupted by the other young man. "Calm down. Maybe my dad is right and my thing is to give first aid," the young man commented as he stretched out his right arm, causing a 5 centimeters diameter wooden stick to emerge from his lower wrist. While the young man was doing this action, he made an annoyed face, causing Izuku to see everything in a worried manner. "Don't worry, it's annoying for me to make them come out. It's normal, just don't distract me." The young man with a quirk that could make canes spoke in a broken and painful tone. Less than a minute passed, and the young man managed to make 3 canes tailored to Izuku's leg. He added an extra pair but tailored to his body so he could lean on it. The gray-haired man quickly made a tourniquet with the 3 batons using part of his jacket. In this way the green-haired man could support himself. In itself, no more than 3 minutes passed in the entire process. "Ready. If it were up to me, I would give you my points. Thanks again. I'll go see if I can join with some to defeat a colossal robot," the young man said, not inviting Izuku due to his spirit, which was quite low. "Thank you," the green-haired man responded. But the gray-haired man only gave him his hand to help him stand up, something that the green-haired man doubted for a moment. but in the end he accepted. "Try not to force your leg. It seems to me that it is torn," said the teenager from the band on the nose in a worried tone. "Ugh, that's good. I thought it was something worse," the green-haired boy commented quite animatedly, looking at his left leg. "Hey, I mean your right leg. I'm not a doctor, but your left leg looks very bad. See a doctor finishing the exam," the young man with yellow eyes concluded as he left. Izuku just nodded as his fellow applicant walked away. He, for his part, began to take some steps. But with every step the green-haired man took he felt great pain in his left leg. It was as if he felt like he was going to burst. But at least he could get away from the stadium. Although he needed to lean on the 2 canes they had made for him, just like in his left heel. But the green-eyed man himself recognized it. He couldn't stand the pain that such a simple action generated. A few minutes passed, but the green-haired boy was actually moving very slowly. He was almost sure that he would finish the exam without being able to reach any exit from the stadium. It was like that until he heard several screams again. "Every man for himself," shouted a young obese blonde man who ran as fast as his body would allow him. Izuku saw him pass by him, quite confused, but more young people began to come out from behind the green-haired man, until a familiar voice spoke to him again. "Forget it, old man, those things can't be beat," the young man who minutes ago had made the canes said, quite discouraged, which carried the green-haired boy back to back in a quick movement, helping him speed up his pace. "What happened?" the freckled man asked, upset, looking at the gray-haired man from the side while he was carried by him. "You would have seen it. We were like 30, and we only managed to run in this direction 15. The others fled everywhere," concluded the young man who could make walking sticks, while he walked somewhat slowly carrying the green-haired boy. "But what the hell are they talking about?" the 9th bearer said, confused and annoyed. "The colossal robot. We attacked it with 30 quirks at the same time. And not a scratch." As the gray-haired young man concluded his sentence, the floor shook again while Izuku turned to his front. He noticed the robot of more than 30 meters that approached them without much inconvenience. All Might's pupil was surprised and internally asked that the gray-haired man speed up his pace, until he himself turned on his side looking forward as much as he could, only to perceive the other young people returning. "There is a building in very bad condition. If we cross it, it could fall on us," said the overweight young man, in addition to the fact that the floor was shaking again. "The exam has to finish now. We can't with that thing," said a young, purple-haired woman who was wearing a bright blue jacket with pants in the same tone. The young people began to talk quite desperately, while the green-haired man turned to look once again at the great machine, which seemed nowhere near crushing them. For a moment the 9th bearer saw everything in slow motion as if the world stopped. He saw the face of his gray-haired companion, as well as that of the other young people. They all aspired to be heroes. But at that moment they all had a worried, scared face. For a moment the freckled man remembered his mentor's words. "That's the mark of a true hero, that his body moved on its own when someone needed help." Izuku only took a deep breath while trying to get out of his partner's grip. However, he felt that pain in his leg. "Old?" the gray-haired man asked, confused, because he felt the movements of his companion. "Put me down," the green-haired man responded seriously and with a shadow in his eyes. But the young man couldn't finish his sentence because he felt like the young man's weight and movements were more powerful than his resistance. Izuku fell face first to the ground, but he still spoke again while trying to stop. "Try to find another way," the green-haired man said nervously, while trying to lean on his arms. "Wait, old man, what are you gonna do?" the gray-haired man asked nervously, trying to help his partner to stand up. With a little effort the teenager stood up with the help of the young man who had the quirk of making poles. "What I must," the green-haired young man said as he took several steps forward, slowly moving away from his partner and limping with the canes that he never left no matter the movements he had received. Even leaning on his canes, the young man tried to take a big jump, like the one he saw his mentor do in several videos he had seen. But all he could hear was the sound of him falling to the floor again, with one of the canes flying. Izuku felt great pain in his leg and his face only reflected that. He was almost sure that this blow made him bleed from his nose. But he needed to ignore it. He needed to try. He didn't understand why the robot wouldn't stop. But he had to stop it. "Old man, you hardly beat a green robot. You have nothing to prove," the gray-haired man shouted. "Let the crazy man kill himself. We have to find a way out while he distracts the robot," the blonde said. But the gray-haired man just ignored him and approached the green-haired man. He was going to get him out of there as if by chance. For his part, the 9th bearer was leaning on his staff on his right side, in a squatting pose with great pain in his left leg. The teenager only closed his teeth very tightly to avoid screaming from the pain he felt, until it was impossible for him to bear the pain and he screamed. "𝐻," the young man shouted, seeing the large robot, while inside he felt something that expanded through his body to finally be released suddenly. For his part, the gray-haired man was only a few steps away from the green-haired boy. but he only saw how the floor above him cracked, and from one moment to the next a great explosion of air was heard. This force threw the young man from the band several meters back in the nose. For his part, Izuku alone felt great pain in his legs. While he was still in the air, the robot quickly detected the young man, and only put his left arm, which looked like a large metal capsule, as a shield. But the green-haired man prepared his right fist, closing it tightly. From one moment to the next, the teenager put his fist in front of him, while the pressure of the air made his hair move back. Just like having his mouth open but with his teeth closed, he again instinctively closed his eyes. Everything happened very quickly for those present, except for the green-haired teenager. He only heard a loud bang as he closed his eyes, only to immediately feel a large amount of metallic parts bounced all over his body, until he stopped feeling them for a few moments. But again the process repeated itself, until for a moment he stopped feeling those metal parts again. For a moment the green-haired boy opened his eyes. He didn't understand how the quirk that he was inherited worked, but when he looked down for the first time during his attack, he felt as if he had done things right. He saw the robot fall in the opposite direction from that of the young people who were scared. For a moment the green-haired man sighed in relief, while his eyelids began to feel very heavy, which caused him to close his eyes again, while everything turned black for the teenager and he stopped perceiving his environment. For its part, the young man's watch had several cracks, causing the screen to flash constantly. At times the following data was visible. Time: 1:16 p.m. Na 77:14 Na. Izuku Midoriya quirk. Strength PT 3000 Ri. Results: it was 12 noon on that Wednesday. The sky shone an intense blue. Some clouds danced in the breeze of the wind. For their part, many young people in the country continued studying in schools to prepare themselves to meet their goals, although the profession they most dreamed of and aspired to was that of professional hero. But attention once again fell on a secondary institution known as Orudera. It was a public school in Japan. It had several floors and was painted a standard white. Said building was located in the area where the green-haired young man lived, who was looking with a dull gaze at the window of his living room. The freckled man was wearing an institution uniform which consisted of black cloth pants, as well as a long-collared jacket in the same tone. The teenager was not wearing his red tennis shoes, since they had been destroyed by his participation in the exam a few weeks ago. Instead, he was wearing his typical shoes that he wore to school, and which were in a black tone. Another change was that he had a bluish sling on his right arm, which rested on his neck. Izuku could still remember his mother worrying about him and berating All Might when they arrived at the apartment after the exam. All Might, he said in a low and thoughtful tone. He had not wanted to speak to the eighth bearer. However, the blonde continued sending messages to the green-haired boy, but he tried not to answer them all. He felt ashamed in every way. How was I going to be able to see All Might after his shameful performance in the exam? The teenager mentally reproached himself. What an idiot. A female voice commented at the back of the room belonging to a young, light-skinned redhead, who was wearing a navy blue feminine jacket with a light brown pleated skirt that reached her knees. The young woman was wearing black feminine shoes, as well as navy blue socks that reached below her knee. That's what happens when you're quirkless. It's easier to disconnect from reality. Another young woman with a similar uniform responded, only she had light blue hair. Both young women began to stand up and walk to the door of the living room while they continued talking. Do you know Deku? You should listen to Katsuki. If you jump, maybe in your next life you won't be so useless, concluded the young redhead while she laughed out loud. Wait, I could receive a useless quirk. It would be worse than being quirkless, the brunette said in a mocking tone. More useless than not having a quirk. Well, with Deku's luck, it's more than likely, the red-haired girl commented quite cheerfully again, as they both left the room, leaving the green-haired man alone. He only slammed his left hand with a closed fist against the desk, but the school furniture did not break. The teenager was fed up, since he returned to school 2 weeks ago. After completing the UA exam, someone commented that he had been in the exam to enter the Hero Academy, which unleashed the storm against the green-haired boy. Was the only one with the quirkless condition in his high school, which led his classmates and schoolmates to make all kinds of comments against the ninth bearer. If the young man was already bothered by his classmates, that made him even more the center of ridicule. Ignore them, Izuku, said a young man with long hair, a little taller than the green-haired man, with a uniform similar to that of the freckled man, except for some brown shoes he was wearing. The young man had a slightly darker skin than the green-haired man. His hairstyle was a haircut that was quite close to the sides and a little longer on the crown of his head. The young man of similar age to his friend went to sit in the seat next to him. Immediately afterwards he put a canned juice on the freckled man's table, while he held his own in his hand. A characteristic feature of the young man was that the sclera of his eyes were black and his pupils were white. Izuku only saw 𝗬𝗵𝗲. He was his only friend during elementary school and now high school. Needless to say, that didn't make the young man with different eyes very popular either. But the ninth bearer had that feeling of guilt towards his friend. He didn't tell her that he would try to get into UA, and even less that he would take the exam. He didn't even know why now he was no longer quirkless. Neither of them had talked about the green-haired man taking the exam, but that made some of the conversations between them a little awkward, as if something got in the way. "If I were you, I wouldn't talk to me," the green-haired man said. He knew they had to talk about the topic, since high school graduation was very close. "I don't know, sometimes you're an idiot," the black-haired man said, a little annoyed, while he took out his can of juice and began to drink it. For his part, the freckled man did not respond. He knew that he did not say it in a mocking tone like the others, but he did know what he was referring to. The young man stopped drinking his drink and spoke again. "I mean, I would have liked to find out from you, and not from some gossip. And even more so when you shouted to the class they cared if I took the exam. I didn't want to. I wanted to try," the freckled man said while stuttering a little, not knowing how to respond. "I'm just saying, I understand that you didn't tell the other idiots, but I'm not one of them. I didn't know what you were going to say. I mean, I know you've never cared that." The green-haired man thought about what he was going to say for a moment, because he knew he was lying to his friend. If he finished that sentence, "I already know that you don't have a quirk," the black-haired man concluded without giving it much importance, while he drank his juice again. I think I have a quirk," the green-haired man said in a nervous tone. But his friend's response came in the form of spitting the juice from his mouth in front of a desk, which was beginning to approach a student's backpack. "ISAM, you idiot. You have to clean that before he finds out," the green-haired boy shouted nervously, knowing that the student who sat there had an enhancing quirk when throwing balls. "I don't give a shit if 𝐻𝐻 hits us in a faggy way with his balls. How do you have a quirk?" The black-haired man responded now, annoyed by his friend's comment, while he wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "Don't shout it," the green-haired man said, while covering his friend's mouth. But the black-haired man quickly removed his friend's hand, while speaking again. "What the hell happened? How did your quirk finally wake up?" "I don't know." The green-haired man remained silent again, while he thought about what he was going to answer. "Only one day I saw that he had a little more strength. Not long ago," he said in a nervous tone. He wasn't lying at all, but he didn't want to reveal everything either. He didn't want to be seen as a failure in front of All Might. "Now unable to keep the secret. We have to clean that," he said again nervously while he looked in his backpack for a cloth or something to dry with. "Forget 𝐻𝐻. How the hell did it happen? I mean, your body was not supposed to be compatible or something," the black-haired man said for a moment, and then remained silent and thought about his friend. He least of all brought up the subject of the quirk, because he knew what it meant to the green-haired man. For a moment the green-haired boy paused, remembering what the doctor had told him and his mother years ago. "Your son is one of the 3 types of quirkless that we have a record of, or as we know him medically, quirkless due to pregnancy." Although the doctor gave a speech about the possible causes, the only thing that remained in the freckled man's mind was that he would never have a quirk. The 2 young people remained silent. Those afternoons seemed far away when they went to each other's houses just to watch anime, play video games, or do all kinds of things. It seemed like a week ago something had been broken in their relationship. However, perhaps that fracture had been going on for longer. The day Bakugo was caught by a villain. "I was there," the green-haired boy said, remembering how he set out to save his partner and personal bully. For his part, the black-haired man only remained silent. I ran to try to help him, and then what was seen on the news happened." The green-haired man thought for a moment if Isamu was really going to tell him everything. That All Might saved him. The wearer of the brown shoes interrupted in a dry tone. "Yes," the green-haired man said without knowing what to respond. He hadn't realized that he was nowhere near saying everything. "And what happened? What does it have to do with you?" the black-haired man asked, quite confused. It's just that. There was a person from All Might's agency. According to him, he saw a strength quirk in me, and he enrolled me in one of his programs. I was prepared all last year," he said in a tone the green-haired man gasped, remembering that his training had only helped him make 3,000 points. His mentor did not let him see where he was in the ranking, but the young man looked for him later. Of the more than 7,000 students who took the practical exam, the freckled man was in the lowest positions in the ranking of candidates. "That explains why we didn't do anything on several weekends," Isamu said, annoyed. Added to the strange year in which his friends sometimes dozed in the living room and did other activities. For his part, the green-eyed boy only had one sudden revelation. In the entire year that he killed himself while training, he had passed by his friend on more than one occasion. He knew that the black-haired boy had also prepared himself to be able to enter a high school, which caused him to many times they couldn't be seen. But many times he also let himself be consumed too much by training. It was of no use. "And if I didn't tell you, everything happened very quickly. Sorry if I was an idiot," the green-haired man said in a sad tone. For his part, the black-haired man remained silent for a long time without knowing what to respond. making the atmosphere feel uncomfortable for both young people. For both of them, many things had changed. Izuku always had the dream of wanting to be a hero and wanting to be a mangaka. In a way, they were almost impossible goals given the condition of both of them. He had to wear special glasses and draw at certain times, and his friend didn't have a quirk. Well, I also lost my mind trying to enter Kagekyuin or other high schools. The boy with unusual eyes said, somewhat discouraged. Did you take the admission exam? Now the freckled man asked, confused and a little discouraged, given that his friend had not told him about it either. Yes, my dad gave me a talk. About, well, you know my father. He responded by downplaying his dad's motivational speeches. For his part, the green-haired boy smiled and at the same time thought about the envy he had of his friend. Not so much because of his quirk, but because his dad always motivated him or his brother, whether it was to work or do things well. Always regardless of what is in front of them. Your dad is great, the green-haired man said unconsciously. Yes, he responded in a dry tone. Have you already received the results? The green-haired man asked, looking at his friend. No, I was also a bit of an idiot, the black-haired man said in a funny tone. This comment made the green-haired man laugh several times, which caused the black-haired man to also laugh several times. In a short time both young people were laughing quite loudly, until a voice from another room shouted, "Shut up, we have to study," causing both young people to lower the intensity of their laughter. I'm glad you have a quirk. Welcome to those cursed with something they didn't want, the young man with black and white eyes said in a funny tone. For his part, Izuku only remained silent. He had always thought that if he had a quirk everything would be different. Perhaps he overanalyzed it as usual. It was not a topic that he discussed much with 𝗬𝗵𝗲, since the condition of his friend allowed him to see things with a kind of X-ray. Although the young man always showed his discontent with that ability in various areas of his life. The green-haired man never said it, but he thought that his friend could function as a great support hero. But the black-haired man's passion was not there. I don't even know how to use it, the freckled man said in a tone of annoyance. I told you that having a quirk was not a big deal, he commented in a calm tone, and then finished his sentence. What surprises me is that 𝗵𝘃𝗀 hasn't said anything. The black-haired man finished in an amused tone as he used to say to the young man with a quirk. Explosive. Don't say that. He can hear you. The former quirkless spoke nervously, thinking what would happen if 𝗵𝘃𝗀 found out about that nickname his friend used. You have to learn not to. But the black-haired man was unable to finish his sentence, due to a scream that could be heard at the door of the living room. IDIOTAS. A young blonde man with red eyes shouted with a uniform similar to that of his companion. Only his jacket was open, revealing a white t-shirt underneath him. The young man was a little taller than both of them, and in a fit of rage, he began to approach the black-haired and green-haired man standing in front of them. What did you say, idiot? The blonde said with a frown, bringing his face closer to the black-haired man in a very intimidating way. This action caused Izuku to be quite intimidated, while 𝗬𝗵𝗲 only saw the blonde seriously. What you heard? The black-haired man responded seriously, but the blonde's response was only a dry punch directly to the right cheek of the seated young man. 𝗵𝘃𝗀, leave it, the green-haired man said quite intimidated. And you're going to prevent me from fucking Deku. The blonde responded quite annoyed with a look full of anger at the green-haired boy. But now the blonde received a blow on the cheek, but due to his anger he did not flinch much. The blow had come from the black-haired man who already had a bruise from the punch on his cheek. None of those present noticed when the young man had stopped to hit the bully. You have me sick of that. But the black-haired man couldn't finish his sentence because he received a very hard blow to the stomach, followed by another on the left cheek, which knocked the young man with black and white eyes to the floor of the living room. The 𝐒𝐻 heroes don't act like this, Izuku shouted desperately, because of his partner's attitude and worried about his friend. But the blonde's response was only to grab the green-haired man by the shoulders, while he was still sitting, and throw him to the floor, making the freckled young man make a very painful face when his right arm collided with the floor of the living room. You are not going to tell me how to act a fucking nerd. More when you didn't even pass the 𝐈𝐴 exam, the blonde ended in a tone full of anger. Izuku only felt the pain in his arm since he hadn't fully recovered from the robot incident. And your medical box with legs. The blonde kicked the black-haired man while he was still on the floor to continue his screams. Do not even think about it. The blonde did not finish his sentence, while the stunned young man received several kicks in the stomach. Tell me again. The black-haired man only continued to feel several kicks from the young man with red eyes. 𝐒𝐭𝐻𝗀𝗄. Do you understand? The blonde said angrily, approaching the black-haired man who was quite stunned on the floor. 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝗄. The green-haired man said, quite annoyed by the situation. While with his left arm he connected his closed fist in the center of the blonde's face, caused the young man with the explosive quirk to fall to the floor. The blonde only felt like a liquid was running down his nose. Because of his school uniform he didn't feel the juice of life falling on his chest. But when he saw that red drops were beginning to stain his white shirt, He quickly put his hand to his chest. Nose. When he saw his hand, he saw it stained with blood, causing an even greater fury to take over him. He mentally thought to himself that fucking Deku was not going to humiliate him. Or dead fucking nerd. The blonde screamed at the top of his lungs, making his voice heard throughout the school. From one moment to the next, the blonde stopped, causing the green-haired boy to now make a scared face. Just as the freckled man tried to turn around and run, he felt himself being violently tackled and knocked to the ground. He didn't know when the blonde pulled him by the hair and moved his body to have him in front of him. But he quickly felt one after another the blows on his cheeks and face. The green-haired man did not realize that part of the blood from the nose of the young man with the explosive quirk was falling on him. This was because the blows had him quite stunned. "I don't give a shit that they expel me," the blonde shouted furiously again, while he opened his hands pointing to the ceiling, causing several sparks to come out of them, plus several small explosions. For his part, the green-haired man only saw his attacker quite dazed. But before anything happened, a voice sounded in the room with a firm tone. "Bakugo, Kazuko, and Midoriya. They're going straight to the director's office," said a man with short blue-gray hair combed to the side and a very muscular body. The man was wearing a red sports jacket and pants. The jacket was open, just as he was wearing white tennis shoes. Far from that secondary school and a bank in the same city, an aggressive transaction was being carried out. "I'm going to count to 60, and if I don't have what we asked for, say goodbye to these hostages." A man was speaking with a balaclava and a brown jacket, as well as with large black pants and boots. The man had his left arm squeezing the neck of a young woman, who was wearing a beach skirt and a pink sweater. With his right hand, he had the tips of her fingers pointing against the neck of the woman, who was paralyzed by terror. The scene at that time took place at the entrance of a bank. There was a police fence made with several metal grates to prevent civilians from passing through. Several police officers stood around it, pointing their guns at the entrance. On his side, a man with a blue cap that had a 5-pointed star in the center was wearing a white long-sleeved shirt, as well as pants in the same tone as his cap. The man was wearing a black vest with various police tools over his shirt, while he was carrying a megaphone near his mouth. "I am Lieutenant Fugaku Hajime. We only ask that you be patient and not hurt the hostages," he said in a firm and determined voice, which belonged to a man around 45 years old. "I'm not very good at following orders, Lieutenant. Plus an hour ago, we made our demands." The man in the balaclava responded quite frustrated. "Nobody wants a problem. We only ask for your cooperation." The man with the megaphone spoke seriously again. "Of course, how hypocritical. We are not a strainer, just because this brat is the daughter of one of the cabinet ministers," the assailant said, quite frustrated, while he began to lengthen his nails against the young woman's neck. "Boy, cancel your quirk before you regret it." He spoke seriously through the megaphone, while he looked at one of the men from the police force behind him and spoke in a low voice. "𝗵𝗲, is your contact already in the area?" the policeman asked seriously. They had to do the operation more carefully because there was a lot at stake. "Lieutenant told me that he was already close," a man around 36 years old responded, checking his phone. The man was wearing a brown trench coat and a hat in the same tone. Underneath, he was wearing a white shirt with a bulletproof vest, as well as black pants and shoes. "All heroes are prohibited from arriving," the police lieutenant said, quite worried, until the bank door opened, revealing another man in a balaclava, this one pulling a girl by the arm, which she had a stuffed hero with wings and yellow glasses. "My daughter," a female voice shouted inside the bank, but a dry shot left in doubt what the fate of that woman was. "See, Lieutenant, this is very simple. If we didn't have a word, we would be like you, or like your heroes. No, we do have to fulfill our demands. I said that if there was no response in 1 hour, we would start killing the hostages," the man in a balaclava said with a serious tone. "What the hell do you want? She's a girl, for all heavens," the police lieutenant responded angrily. "The end of this era. Piranha, do the honors," said the guy in a balaclava who was still pointing his claws at the politician's daughter. The second man was only pushing the girl around the age of 7, while she watched her stuffed animal fall away from her. The same man in a balaclava transformed his left arm into a huge carnivorous plant, which opened very sharp teeth, which poured a viscous liquid on the girl. And no one thinks of doing something because if not, the minister's daughter dies. This is the reality, Lieutenant. Not all lives are worth the same for this society," the first man in a balaclava shouted. The police officers felt like their hands were tied. One wrong move and these psychopaths, they would only do carnage. Or so they thought, until the detective's cell phone received a message with the following words: "I'm here. I'm sorry for the door in the building. I told you that the heroes wouldn't come, brat," the man with the plant hand said, while he went straight to eat half of the girl's body. But from one moment to the next, a tremor took over the area, making everyone stop for a moment. "What the hell?" said the man with elongated nails. Only a few shots could be heard inside the bank, so that someone could say a few bad words. But immediately the door of the bank broke, revealing a fairly tall figure in red, blue, and yellow. Said figure extended his arms with his fists clenched against the faces of both assailants in balaclava, leaving them quite stunned and preventing both of them from harming their hostages. Those actions had happened in less than 5 seconds, but the professional hero didn't stop there. From one moment to the next he grabbed the back of both bandits' jackets and took a big leap. In the blink of an eye the man with great muscles was already in the skies of the city, and without any consideration he threw both men in balaclavas against the roof of a large skyscraper. Both only felt the blow against their bodies. Neither of them realized when the hero's blow caused them to release their hostages. But even before they recovered, the roof of the building shook as the figure that had just killed them landed, to sweep them away in a few seconds. There stood a man of great height and build, with blonde hair raised in 2 strands on the sides of his head. On this occasion the hero was wearing one of his regular suits, which was adjusted to fit his body. His boots and part of his forearms were in yellow, while the part of his pants and shirt were in a bright blue. Around the entire suit, there were lines, patterns in red and white, while he was shining on the front of his waist a belt with a V in yellow and some ovals on the sides in red. The professional hero was squatting due to his landing but showing an angry face with great fury, revealing his eyes with a black sclere and a pair of bright blue pupils. It was a girl. The 8th bearer said furiously. "Big deal," the man with the plant arm responded, lunging at the hero and devouring him in half, while he started laughing. "You were not that shocking. Truth all." But the man in the balaclava did not finish his sentence, since he was lifted into the air by the synergy of his arm, while he fell backwards on the roof. From one moment to the next, the so-called number 1 hero freed himself from the plant's mouth, opening it to the sides. All Might didn't have any scratches, but he was covered in the strange slime. But without wasting time he landed a strong blow against the guy in the balaclava on the floor, knocking him out instantly. But before he could ration, the hero felt a kind of touch on his back. His suit had perhaps received a slight scratch, but his body was still intact. The hero turned around still with his blue gaze shining in fury, which caused the guy with his claws to be intimidated for several moments, taking steps back. He now understood why many Yakuza had fled Japan. "You're going to rot in a cell," the hero said furiously, while he hit the guy with the claws in the stomach, making him lose all his air and fall to his knees, causing him to only see a shadow in front of him. Sapphire orbs alight in fury. "Nana," he said in a tone of frustration when he saw that he and his friends had been used by their mysterious benefactor. Upon hearing that name, the hero only burned with even more fury, throwing a sharp blow against the assailant's face. Finally, all you could hear was the sound of the body falling on the ceiling. The blonde man saw in front of him the man in a balaclava knocked out. He had used all his willpower not to give him a lethal blow, although a part of him would have wished it that way. Even in his muscular form, the hero only saw the ground from the great skyscraper. He quickly took both types under his arms, until something suddenly made him connect. "What the hell is that sound?" the blonde commented, looking at the entire body of the bandits, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. He opened the jackets, took off the balaclavas, but nothing. Mentally he asked himself again where was that sound coming from. But this one was just starting to sound faster. Without thinking twice, the professional hero took both bodies and launched himself at full speed in a large jump, heading to the place where he had originally jumped, while the police continued looking for clues in the bank. At the same time, several paramedics took an injured lady away on a stretcher, while several police officers were already taking 3 of the assailants who were knocked out in the bank to the station. For her part, the girl who was almost killed by the plant was just crying about the situation, until someone put a stuffed animal that was familiar to her in front of her. "Don't worry, your mom will be fine. She wasn't shot in a critical place," said the man in the brown trench coat, who had just taken off his hat and was squatting in front of the girl, stretching out his hand to give her his stuffed animal. The girl continued sobbing while she spoke. "You lie." "My mom," the young woman said while several tears came out of her eyes. "Don't worry, I'll take you to her as soon as they take care of her. Do you have any family in the city?" the detective said in a friendly tone, until a voice called him. "𝐿𝐴𝐿 come quick," said the lieutenant's voice. "I'll be right back." The detective spoke kindly, while the girl tightly hugged the stuffed animal of the hero that had been returned to her. The agent put on his hat and walked to where his boss was. Most likely they would tell him about the disaster that All Might made this time. But before anyone said anything, a huge roar took over the area. Everyone present saw the number 1 hero land abruptly, but he did not look calm or with a smile like he did when he finished these types of missions. "𝗵𝗲, where are the other attackers?" he said in a serious tone, the professional hero startling more than one person in the place. "All Might what?" the detective asked, confused, but was interrupted. "Where?" the 8th bearer spoke loudly. The detective understood it quickly. He only pointed at him with his right arm and spoke seriously. "They are going to the North Station. The patrol car has several scratches on the hood." Immediately the professional hero took a big jump again, jumping from building to building while the lieutenant approached, quite confused. The professional hero wasted no time, jumping from building to building, wall to wall, while he was talking to himself. "Where are they? Where are they?" she said while she jumped, and the infernal beeping increased his speed and noise. Several seconds passed until he saw the patrol car with several scratches on its hood. The hero launched himself at great speed from the wall of a building, only to land in front of the police officers, making a slight tremor in the street. The drivers suddenly stopped the patrol car, remaining several centimeters from the hero's body. "All Might, what the hell is happening? You could give them to our companions." But the number hero only responded quickly, while he walked to the back door of the vehicle. "Are they all?" he answered as he ripped off the door of the patrol car and took out the 3 remaining assailants. "Yes, but what the hell are you doing? Heroes cannot intervene once a criminal is captured," the police officer, still in the patrol car, said quite seriously, while the other colleague got out of the vehicle. "All Might, leave them or we will have to arrest you." The other police officer spoke while he took out his gun and pointed it at the hero. But from one moment to the next the hero just took a big leap. In a few seconds he was over the city sky again. "Officer Hiroki here." All Might intervened between the patrol and took out the 3 robbers of the 𝗵𝗃 bank. I repeat, All Might took the robbers. "It is on Carmen Street." He did not give any explanation. The police officer said, quite scared. But in the air the story was different. The 5 bandits were knocked out and none of them could speak. Only that noise could be heard, only louder now. The professional hero knew that he had to throw the assailants as far away from the city as possible so that nothing would happen, although many questions were beginning to crowd into the hero's head. But he should not waste time. First he took the guy with the quirk of his nails and raised him above him. In a few seconds he moved away in such a way that he was lost from sight. Quickly the hero now threw the guy off the plant. Something inside him made him recognize that he did not want this end for anyone. But he couldn't let greater harm hurt more innocents. The blonde noticed him, how his throws began to return him to the asphalt when he saw several skyscrapers near him. So he quickly launched a blow of air from his legs by sheer force to increase his distance from the ground, managing to rise once again over the buildings. The muscular man was now launching a 3rd assailant, but at that moment the noise stopped being a beeping sound that came and went and became a constant noise, which caused the hero to only hear that noise that was very well known. From outside the bank the officers had just heard what the number 1 hero had just done. But before they could make a decision, they quickly saw how the sky was filled with a sequence of infernal fireworks in reddish and orange tones. The first happened at a high altitude above the city, looking like a small beam of light that lasted a few seconds. The second happened with a slightly larger size, but it only looked like a small ball. However, the third one became noticeable in a good part of the city, and immediately the 4th and 5th explosions emerged, merging into one, which covered a good part of the city's airspace. The officers looked at the scene with a look of uncertainty and surprise. They weren't just bombs. For his part, the detective saw the large fireball only increase in size, while it violently spat something at full speed. "All Might," the officer said worriedly upon seeing his friend in that situation. For his part, the hero only felt how his ear was ringing as if he were hearing a whistle that broke his hatred. But he was quickly taken out of his thoughts because he felt a strong blow on his back. When he realized exactly where he was, he realized he had just crashed into a skyscraper. Before he could think of anything, the muscular man only began to fall from the large building at a great speed. The blonde had been somewhat unconscious until he reacted and tried to grab hold of some structure, which failed several times. One after another he stretched out his limbs to try to grab hold of some protrusion of the building, until he managed to cling with both hands to the concrete at the bottom of a window. The hero only placed his feet against the wall, while clinging with his hands to that projection. At that moment he didn't realize it, but his suit had several tears and some wounds on his body. It had to be the liquid from the plant, the hero told himself in a strained tone, trying to justify his condition. He had already had experience with explosions and they didn't usually hurt him, but the blonde had definitely felt the damage even a little. His body began to cramp, which contributed to the fact that he could not hold onto the ledge any longer and fell again. The hero was fighting gravity again, while the air lifted his hair at great speed. But he tried once again to grab hold of a ledge, stretching his arms somewhat desperately. After several attempts, he succeeded again. But he could swear he felt a tear with this new grip, as his teeth ground together from the pain he felt. The hero did not understand why he felt like he was drugged, until a voice took him out of his thoughts. "All Might," said a young man in an office suit, while he saw the professional hero at the bottom of the window, who was struggling to hold on. "Yes," the hero responded quite confused and in pain, while the young man called his companions. Although the hero did not know if his response had been heard through the glass. "He looks hurt." another young woman commented while seeing the number one hero. But not at her best, since several parts of her suit were torn and burned, as well as she had some trickles of blood from her mouth, along with a large amount of dirt and charred parts all over her body. We have to do something. Hiro brings a screwdriver or something. We have to remove the windows or break them. The young man in a business suit spoke when he saw the hero with great difficulty clinging to the building. The boss is going to kill us if we do that, responded another employee who was responding to his colleague's call. It doesn't matter, he saved my cousin once, the young man from the office said quite euphorically. I also helped my grandfather once. The young woman who had noticed the hero's state spoke. For his part, the hero felt a little humiliated by the scene. Even he wasn't in his civilian form. But he didn't understand why the bombs had hurt him more. Don't worry, All Might, we will help you, the young man commented, while a colleague arrived with some fire axes. Quickly the office workers began to attack the glass, which began to crack, all in order to help the blonde. For his part, the hero felt how his arms began to cramp and that sensation of blood inside accumulated again, causing him to spit out some of the red liquid, while he felt how he was losing strength. I still have 10 minutes left, the professional hero thought to himself, while feeling the effects of not being able to maintain his form. But finally, he closed his eyes and turned his face away as he heard the glass break. The office workers broke most of the glass, while the young woman directed others with the fire hose that they had extended to the window. Take the hose, All Might, the young woman commented, while several workers grabbed it as if it were a rope. For his part, the blonde swallowed his pride and took the improvised rope. In this way he propelled himself with his legs, managing to climb the ledge. At the same time he was helped through the broken window, causing the hero to stagger to fall on his palms and knees. As he returned he spit out the blood accumulated in his throat. Many doctors had told him so. If he did extreme activities he could bleed to death inside. Several of the office workers saw the number one ranking hero in that state, but with a worried face, although one of the office workers discreetly took out his cell phone to record the moment. But he was quickly pushed away by the young man who had first recognized the hero. What the hell are you doing? He commented, annoyed, seeing his partner. You know what, with this video, can any newspaper give us a lot of money? The office worker responded quite cheerfully. However, the other just grabbed his cell phone and began to step on it, quickly grabbing his partner by the collar of his shirt, preparing to unleash his fury on him. Leave it, the hero commented in a weak but somewhat firm tone even in his muscular form. But the young man who was going to hit his partner responded. But the hero spoke again. I only ask for what happened here. Let it not be known, the hero said a little brokenly as he slowly stood up and began to catch his breath. All Might, do you need a doctor? Asked the young woman who had the idea of the hose. I'm fine. You just caught me off guard. I wish I could stay, but I have to go back to work. Thank you very much. Today you saved me. Where is the elevator? The hero said something, panting, but trying to maintain his joy. You are not in a position to leave like this, commented the office worker who had recognized him in the first place, while several of his companions followed him. I'm fine. I've gotten out of worse situations, he responded, feigning his best posture, although this action hurt him a little. But you spit blood, another office worker commented. I'm fine, the professional hero commented. But before anyone said anything else, a voice from the office said something in the background on the left. An older man said, understanding the situation better than the young people. Thanks again. He finished a little less animated and began to walk a little slowly. Mr. Albert. Why? Said the young man who broke his partner's phone. But the man who had spoken had a bald head and a large mustache along with the office uniform. From his quick appearance you could tell that his age was around 55. But even so the man looked very bright for his age and continued talking once the hero had gone far enough away. Because All Might is human, like any hero. For his part, the hero has just reached the elevator door while pressing a button and waiting for it to arrive. Several drops of blood and sweat slid down his body. But our society, it requires them to be more than heroes. They have to be symbols, role models. The hero only heard how the elevator arrived. He quickly made sure that there was no one in it. As he entered, the door closed behind him. The hero only took several steps, then dropped to the floor. But that's just a facade. The blonde could see where he was and realized that there was a camera on him. Damn, the hero said, knowing that he still had to maintain his form. The hero only took out his phone to realize that it now had a cracked screen, revealing part of the internal plate, added to the fact that it did not turn on. What was missing? He said in a tone of annoyance. It was the fourth phone that he had replaced in the last few years, last 3 months, and sometimes that facade becomes a lie that we all prefer to think is truth. The hero only saw his reflection in the elevator mirror. Now he could see clearly his wounds and damage from what had happened. His hair had a strand fallen and was somewhat burned. His suit had several tears, revealing his muscular figure, but at the same time the scar that he tried most to hide in the center of his body. He added the new burns. The hero didn't remember looking this bad since he fought with the villain who almost killed him or his first mission. The slime, he gasped out the phrase, seeing himself in his reflection as if he were trying to answer his current state. But he is all might. He helps people every day. He is not just another hero, Mr. Albert. The young man responded, elated by the veteran's words. Yudo-kun, I'm not belittling him. Of the heroes who do their job, for me he is one of the best. But without the costume, without the quirks that are above average, without all the heroism that characterizes them. All heroes, they are as human as you and I, with a life outside of their heroic work, with people important to them, with virtues. For a moment, several in the office remembered some heroes who had helped them at some point in their lives. With defects, a man was seen flying over an area of the city using some flares. In the blink of an eye he descended and violently hit a criminal. With secrets, which finally caused the young man in the office and his colleagues to think a little about what the more experienced worker was saying. For its part, the elevator continued going down with the hero inside. It was the slime. The slime, he repeated to himself again, while he let out several sighs without stopping to see his reflection. Finally, the hero closed his eyes and leaned his head against one of the walls of the elevator. He didn't want to continue seeing what he looked like at that moment.